Welcome back to Harry's Verse, where every story begins with a single dangerous question. Today's tale: what if Harry Potter died at the Veil and was reborn as the Master of Death itself? If you haven't already, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now settle in, let's begin. Chapter 1: The Veil. The room had no business existing beneath London. It sank downward in tiers of pale stone, bench upon bench descending toward a pit at its center, an amphitheater built for an audience that never came. At the bottom of that stone well stood a dais, and on the dais rose an archway older than the ministry that housed it, older perhaps than the city overhead. The arch was cracked in three places and should by every law of masonry have fallen 1,000 years ago. It did not fall. From the mouth of it hung a curtain, ragged and gray, and the curtain moved though the air in the deep chamber lay dead and cold. It swayed as a thing sways in a current, and it whispered. Harry heard the whispering before he heard anything else, before the spell fear, before the shouts. It reached him the way a tide reaches a sleeper on a shore, patient and without hurry, and when he came down the tiers two at a time with his wand up and his friends scattered and bleeding behind him, the whispering did not stop for the war. It went on under everything. Voices at the very edge of language, murmuring on the other side of the veil, saying his name in a way that was not quite his name. He did not have time to listen. That was the mercy of it later, when he understood what listening would have cost. They had come here on the strength of a vision. That was the shape of the trap, and Harry had walked into it eyes open as he walked into everything, because the vision had shown him Sirius on this very floor with Voldemort standing over him, and Harry had not stopped to ask why a man who could see into his mind would let him see that particular thing. Five had come with him through the fireless dark of the ministry after hours. Ron somewhere back in the tangle of rooms with his arm laid open by a curse that made his thoughts swim, Hermione carried unconscious by Neville after Dolohov's silent slash across her chest, Ginny limping on an ankle turned the wrong way, and Luna pale and calm and stepping over rubble as though she walked in a garden, holding the line at the door because someone had to. They had been children an hour ago. The ministry had a way of ending that quickly. Every one of them had fought like something older and harder than they were, and every one of them was still alive, and Harry meant to keep it that way, which was the last purely human intention he would form before the veil took him. Death Eaters had come down into the chamber behind them, hoods torn back now, faces bare and lit white by the flares of curses. The Order had come after the Death Eaters. The prophecy, the glass sphere that had begun all of this, lay somewhere in shattered fragments up in the Hall of Prophecy with its secret spilled and lost, and none of that mattered now, because now there was only the fight, and the fight had reached the dais, and the dais held the arch. Harry, Sirius, was 3 steps below him, black hair loose, gray Azkaban thin face alight with something that in another man might have passed for joy. He jeweled as he did everything recklessly, gloriously, throwing himself into the space between his godson and the curses with a bark of laughter that had no fear in it. Good man, now get back, get up the tiers, get the others out, I'm not leaving you. You will do exactly as I. A jet of green split the air where Sirius had stood a half-second before. He rolled, came up firing, and the Death Eater who had cast it folded backward off the dais and did not rise. As I say, Neville's hurt. Get him up top, go. Harry did not go. He would turn that refusal over in his hands for a long time afterward in places where time did not run, and he would never be able to decide whether it had been love or arrogance, and he would come to understand that with him the two had always been braided too tightly to pull apart. The chamber was a cauldron of light. Kingsley's spellwork boomed against the far wall. Tonks had gone down 2 tiers up and was not moving. Lupin had his hands full with Dolohov. Moody's magical eyes spun in the chaos like a blue coal, and in the middle of it, dancing, laughing, her black hair a storm around a face that had once been beautiful and was now something carved out of appetite, came Bellatrix Lestrange. She loved this. That was the thing Harry could not stop seeing even in the churn of the fight. She loved it, the killing, the way a musician loves an instrument, and she moved toward the dais with her wand weaving patterns in the air and her voice climbing into the sing-song she used when she was happiest. Little Potter, she crooned, come to play in the grown-ups' room, come to die where the old things die. Sirius met her at the top of the dais. What happened then happened in less time than it takes to say it, and it took Harry the rest of forever to say it to himself. They dueled the length of the platform, cousin against cousin, the House of Black turned against itself, and Sirius was laughing, and Bellatrix was singing, and their curses passed so close to the arch that the gray curtain bellied out toward them and the whispering rose to something that was almost a chord. Sirius drove her back a step, then another. He was better than she was, or he was luckier, or the years in Azkaban had left more of him intact than they had left of her. And for the length of 3 exchanges Harry believed, with the whole bright certainty of a 15-year-old who had never yet been made to pay the full price of anything, that his godfather was going to win. Bellatrix stopped singing. That was the tell. Harry would learn to read such things later in the cold arithmetic he would make of every enemy he faced. He would learn that the most dangerous moment is not the shout but the silence that comes after it. But he did not know it yet, and Sirius, who did know it, was a half-step out of position, taunting her, his wand arm wide. Her curse came low and fast and red, and it was not aimed at Sirius. It was aimed at the space behind him. At Harry. Sirius saw it. Of course he saw it. He had spent a year learning to see nothing else. He threw himself sideways to put his body in its path, and he was fast, faster than a man his age and his history had any right to be, but he was a half step out of position, and the half step was the whole of it, and the curse was going to pass over his shoulder and take Harry in the chest. Harry moved. He did not decide to move. His body decided in the animal way that bodies decide that the man falling toward him was going to be a half second too slow, and so it took the half second for him. He caught Sirius by the front of his robes and he turned, hauling, spending his own balance to spin them both, and the geometry of it was simple and merciless. Someone was going to be standing where the curse arrived, and Harry made sure it was not Sirius. The red light struck him in the side and there was no pain, only a shove, a great flat impossible shove like the flat of a giant's hand, and the shove carried him off his feet and up onto the dais and back toward the arch, and the whispering swelled to meet him with a sound like the whole sea saying yes. He heard Sirius scream his name. He heard Bellatrix laughing and then strangely stop. He heard Lupin's voice crack across the chamber. And then the gray curtain closed over his face like water closing over stone, and the world of the living with all its light and noise and love was on the other side of it, and Harry Potter fell out of it entirely. There was no floor beyond the veil. He understood that first before he understood anything else, that his feet had found nothing, that the fall which had begun as a stumble on stone had become a fall through no place at all. The chamber was gone. London was gone. The war was a rumor somewhere infinitely above him, a fading pressure in his ears, and around him now there was only the falling and the dark. But it was not the dark of a closed room. It was the dark of the space between stars, vast and populated, and as he fell through it he began to see. He saw that the whispers had faces. They came out of the black on every side, uncountable, a nation of the departed streaming past him in the opposite direction, upward, toward some brightness he could not turn to look at, and their faces were not frightening. That was the thing he had not been prepared for in all the ghost stories and the graveyard nights and the long green flashes of his short violent life. The dead were not frightening. They were only leaving. Old men and infants, women in the dress of 100 centuries, soldiers, mothers, kings with the crowns gone soft as candle wax, and every one of them wore an expression he had no word for, something between the relief of a traveler who sees the lights of home and the sorrow of one who will not pass this way again. They did not reach for him. A few of them looked at him as they passed, and their looking left frost on the inside of his skull, and he knew in the way you know a thing in a dream, wholly and without evidence, that he was going the wrong way. One of them slowed. She was rising with the rest, a woman with dark red hair loose about a face he had seen exactly once in a mirror that showed the dead, and never since except behind his own eyes in the worst hours. She turned in the current of the departed and found him falling against the tide, and for the length of a heartbeat he no longer had she looked at him, and her looking did not leave frost. It left the opposite of frost. It left the memory of a warmth he had no memory of, a green afternoon he had never lived to see. His whole ruined self bent toward her the way iron bends toward a lodestone. He began without deciding to reach. She shook her head once, not in refusal of him, in warning. And then the current carried her up and the light took her, and she was one more far star among the rising. And Harry fell on past the place where she had been and did not follow and did not understand yet that he had just been shown in advance and in mercy the exact shape of the ruin he would have to refuse 1,000 times before the end. The whispering he had heard through the veil was clearer here at the bottom of the fall, and he understood at last what it had been saying all along. It was not one voice. It was every voice, the accumulated last words of everything that had ever spoken, layered so deep that no single sentence could be pulled from the weave, and it did not mourn and it did not welcome. It only continued, the way a river continues past a drowned man without malice and without pause, because a river is not for him and never was. He had spent his life believing that death was a hunter. He was learning in the falling that death was a country and that countries do not hunt. They simply are, and one comes to them, and the coming is the only journey that no traveler has ever refused for long. They were rising, he was still falling, and the falling had a country. He had thought in the first plunge that there was nothing here but dark and the streaming dead, but the longer he fell the more the dark declined to be empty. It had architecture. Far off at distances the eye could not honestly hold, there were shapes that might have been cliffs or might have been the flanks of some sleeping vastness, and rivers that did not shine and yet could be followed by the deeper black they cut through the black, and once terribly something that was unmistakably ashore, a long pale strand where the risen dead gathered before they went up, and on the strand a light that was not the sun and never had been, toward which they all turned their faces as a field of flowers turns. He fell past all of it. He fell the way a coin falls through deep water, turning, and each turn showed him more of the country of endings, and none of it was made for the living to see, and he saw it, and it did not blind him, and that alone should have told him what he was becoming. He tried to call out and found he had no breath to do it with, and then he understood why, and the understanding arrived without terror, because there was no longer any body in which terror could sit. His chest did not rise. His pulse, that small drum that had counted out every second of his life since a night in Godric's Hollow, had gone quiet. He put a hand to his ribs, and the hand passed through nothing that answered it, and he looked down the length of himself and saw that he was becoming difficult to see, that the edges of him were unraveling into the same dark he fell through, thread by thread, the way a word spoken aloud unravels into silence the instant after it is said. He was dying. He had in the plainest sense already died. The curse and the fall had been the door, and this was the corridor beyond it, and he was walking it whether he willed it or not, and at the end of every corridor there is a room. He should have been afraid. He waited to be afraid, It did not come, and its absence was itself the strangest thing that had happened to him, stranger than the falling, stranger than the dead. All his life fear had been the water he swam in, the constant companion, the thing under the stairs and the thing in the graveyard and the thing behind the red eyes. And here, at the one moment when every story said fear should have swallowed him whole, he found only a great and spreading quiet, and in the quiet a question forming slowly the way frost forms on a window. Why am I not afraid? And a voice that was not the whispers, that was under the whispers the way bedrock is under a river, answered him. Because you have come to me before, he stopped falling. There was no impact. The falling simply ceased to be true as a fever ceases, and he found that he was standing, though there was nothing beneath his feet that he could name, and that the streaming nation of the dead had thinned around him to a few late travelers, and that the darkness ahead of him had gathered itself into a shape. He had spent a great deal of his life imagining what waited at the end of the green light. He had pictured many things. He had not pictured this because there was no picturing this. The mind is a warm lit room, and this would not fit through its door. But he could hold pieces of it, and the pieces were these. It was tall. Not tall as a man is tall, but tall as a weather is tall, as a coming storm stands up over the sea. The eye kept trying to find where it ended and kept being handed gently back to the beginning. It wore darkness, and the darkness was not empty. It moved with the same slow current that had moved the veil, and in its folds Harry saw, or thought he saw, everything that had ever ended. Not corpses, endings, the last note of a song. The final page of a book read by candlelight in a house that no longer stands. The moment a star, having spent its fire, closes its long eye. All of these were sewn into the fabric of the thing that stood before him, and they gave off no light, and yet he could see them the way you can see the shape of a sleeper by the fall of a sheet. Where a face should have been there was attention, that was the closest word. A vast and ancient attention turned wholly upon him, patient as stone and older than stone, and behind it very faint, something that in a smaller creature he would have called courtesy. He was in the presence of death, not a death. Not the boggart thing, the wisp of a dementor, the personal and particular dying that came for each living thing in its hour. This was the whole of it, the fact behind all the facts, the end toward which the nation of the dead had been streaming, the last door of every corridor everywhere, standing in the dark and looking at him with the near-infinite gentleness of a thing that has never once needed to hurry, because everything in the end comes to it. Harry looked back. He would think afterward, no right to look back. Braver men than he had turned their eyes away from far less. But he had been looking into the faces of terrible things since he was a year old, and some habits go all the way down, past the body, past the blood, into whatever it is that keeps looking when the eyes are gone. So he lifted what remained of his face, and he met the attention that had killed everything that had ever lived, and he did not look away. Something moved in the darkness. It might have been the beginning of interest. You look at me, said Death, and the words did not come through any air because there was no air. They arrived already inside him, spoken in the marrow he no longer had. Most do not. The few who do it once, and then they pass, and their looking is forgotten by the morning. The attention deepened. You have looked at me 4 times. Harry found that he could speak, not with a voice, with whatever the dead spoke with, the thing under the whispers. 4, he repeated. A night in a house that burned. Death did not move, and yet the darkness around it seemed to turn a page. A chamber beneath a school with a basilisk dying and its venom in your arm. A graveyard where a man came back who should not have, and you stood in the open and watched me pass you by. The attention pressed closer, and the frost of the passing dead was nothing beside the cold of it. And now, the veil. 4 times you have stood at my door, Potter. 4 times you have looked in. No other thing that breathes has done so and kept its eyes. And now I'm dead, Harry said, so you can stop counting. If a storm could be amused, it was. Can I? The word hung there, and in it Harry heard faintly the first note of everything that was coming, though he could not yet read the music. I felt the curse, he said. He was working it out aloud, as he had always worked out the worst things, dragging them into the light where he could at least see their shape. I felt myself come apart back there. I saw myself going, so this is it. This is the part where I go up with the rest of them. He tipped what remained of his head toward the last of the rising dead, dwindling now to a scatter of far lights. That's the way out, isn't it, for them, but not for me. Not yet, said Death, which is a thing I have said to no one in a very great while, and it displeases me to say it. The darkness rippled, and in the ripple was something that might have been the ghost of an old irritation worn smooth by ages. You are not supposed to interest in me, Potter. I am the end of interest. I am where interest goes to be put down at last and rest, and yet what? Death was silent, and the silence had weight, and in it Harry became aware of 3 points of cold that were not the cold of the presence before him. They were nearer than that. They were, he realized, inside him or on him, sewn into what was left of him the way the endings were sewn into Death's dark robe. 3 fixed stars of cold, and each of them had a shape, and he knew the shapes. The first was a rectangle over his shoulders, a weight he had carried so long he had stopped feeling it. The cloak, his father's cloak, the cloak that had come down to him out of a history no one had ever bothered to tell him, and which he had used to sneak past caretakers and hide from murderers, and had never once thought of as anything but a tool. The second lay against a finger he did not have, a ring's worth of cold, though he wore no ring, and the third lay along the line of an arm, wand-shaped, though the wand in question was in another man's, keeping 100 miles and 1 world away. 3 points of cold, 3 shapes, and Death was looking at them and then at him with the attention of a creditor reading a very old and very strange ledger. You know the story, said Death. It is told to children. It is told badly. Three brothers, Harry said slowly. The Peverils, they cheated you, made a bridge over a river you'd meant to drown them in, and you were angry, so you offered them prizes, and the prizes were traps. The pieces were moving now, sliding toward a picture he did not yet want to see. A wand that couldn't lose, a stone that could call back the dead, a cloak to hide from. He stopped. From you. I was not angry, said Death, and there was in the correction a precision that Harry would come to know very well, the precision of a thing that had all of time in which to be exact. Anger is four things that can be surprised. I made the three hallows as a gardener makes a maze, not to trap, but to see who could walk it. Two of the brothers could not. They took their prizes and their prizes took them, and they came to me as all things come, grasping and afraid. The dark folds turned again. The third walked the maze to its end. He wore the cloak until he was old, and he hid from me not at all, and when his hour came he took off the cloak and gave it to his son and greeted me as an equal, and went with me gladly as one old friend goes with another into a house they have both long wished to see. The attention settled on Harry, total and unhurried. That man was Ignotuspvrll, said Death. And you are what is left of him in the world. Harry said nothing. The 3 points of cold burned steadily inside the fading map of him. The hallows aren't together, he said at last. I've only got the cloak, the wands, someone else has the wand, the stone's lost, nobody's held all three since nobody's ever held all three. He looked at the vast, patient dark. So whatever you're about to tell me, the story doesn't fit. I'm not the master of anything. I'm a dead schoolboy who tripped through a curtain. Do not, said Death, with such gentleness that it was the most frightening thing it had yet done, mistake the thing for the object. And the 3 points of cold inside Harry answered the words. They woke. He felt them wake the way you feel dawn behind your eyelids before you are awake enough to name it. The rectangle over his shoulders, the ring against his phantom finger, the wand along his phantom arm, each of them warming from cold to something that was not warmth but was its equal and opposite, alive and gathering charge, and they were reaching for one another across the nothing, 3 notes seeking a single chord, and the chord when they found it went through what remained of Harry Potter like the first bell of a cathedral going through the stones of the town below. He cried out. There was no sound. The nation of the dead, the last far lights of it, all turned at once and looked back down at him and then were gone. Mastery, said Death over the ringing, is not ownership. The wand, the stone, the cloak, these are merely where men have been able to put their hands. The hallow itself is not wood or jewel or cloth, it is the relation. It is the one who can stand before the unconquerable and not kneel, the one who can call what is gone and not go mad with longing, the one who can wear the dark and not be swallowed. For an age of the world that one has not come. Men have held the objects and mastered nothing. The cord was still ringing and Harry was still holding together against it barely, and Death watched him hold. You have held one object and begun to master all three, because mastery was never in the things. It was in the standing, and you, Potter, have done nothing your whole short life but stand. The ringing reached its height and did not break him, and Harry understood in the ruin of it that this was the point, that the cord had been a test as much as a summons, and that he had passed it not by strength but by refusing, the same as always, to lie down. He was on what would have been his knees. He got up. There was nothing to get up from and nothing to get up with, and he did it anyway, and Death watched him do it, and the ancient attention sharpened to a fine and terrible point. All right, Harry said. His non-existent voice shook and then steadied. All right, say I believe you, say I'm whatever you're saying I am, the last Peveril, the one who can stand. What does that get me? I'm still dead. You said it yourself, the way out is up with the rest of them, and I'm not going up, so what's left? You keep me here, a pet, a curiosity for the end of interest to poke at when eternity gets slow. Something happened in the darkness then that Harry had no frame for. It was not laughter, though laughter was the nearest human thing to it. It was more like the sound a mountain would make if it found, after 10,000 years, one green thing growing in a crack near its summit, and was, against all its granite expectation, pleased. No, said Death, not a pet. The dark unfurled. It stood up over Harry the way the storm stands up over the sea, and now at last it came toward him, and the endings sewn into its robe passed close enough that he could read them, and he saw the last day of the world in there, folded and waiting and unafraid, and he did not look away from that either. I have been alone, said the oldest thing in existence, since before there was a word for alone. I am the end, and the end keps no company, for all company is only the not yet and thui flee me, and they are right too. I do not ask for company. I have forgotten if I ever knew what it would be. The attention lowered itself to the level of Harry's ruined eyes. But once in a great age there walks a thing that can stand in a wide door and look in and not flee. And when it comes I am permitted, by what law I will not tell you, for you are not yet fit to hear it, to make an offer. An offer, Harry said, yes. The last time you made an offer 2 men died grasping and afraid, and the third gave up everything he had and walked into your house. The dark went very still. You listened, said Death, and there was something new in it, something that might in 10,000 years grow into respect. Good. Then listen to this, and weigh it as ignotuswghedhis, for it is heavier than his by the whole weight of the world. And Death told him. It did not tell him in words, or not only in words. It opened the way the veil had opened, and Harry saw. He saw the offer entire, the shape and the price and the far consequence of it, all at once, the way the Dead See, and there was too much of it for the warm lit room of a living mind, but he no longer had a living mind. He had whatever was left when the room burned down, and into that burned and open space the whole of it poured. He saw himself remade, not restored, remade. He saw that the body he had left twitching on a dais beneath London was a used thing, a chrysalis, and that what came out of a chrysalis is not the caterpillar mended. He saw the office that death was offering, and it was not a gift and it was not a rescue. It was a throne in a country no living man had ruled, dominion over the very hinge between the quick and the dead, the hallows made whole not as trinkets but as an emblem worn into the flesh, the wand that does not lose and the stone that calls the gone and the cloak that hides from the end, all three folded into one power and that power folded into him. And he saw the price. He saw that a living thing is tied to the world by 1,000 warm threads, the taste of bread, the weight of a friend's hand, the particular gold of an afternoon in June, and that each of those threads is also a thing that can be spent. He saw that the power death offered ran on exactly that currency, that to reach across the hinge and pull a soul back or push one through or unmake a thing that had cheated its ending, he would pay in threads. That the throne would keep him standing between the worlds only so long as there was warmth in him to spend, and that if he spent it all he would not die. That was the terrible core of it, that he could no longer simply die. He would instead dwindle into the office itself, the Harry burned out of him and only the master left, a cold and perfect instrument, another death for the world to flee. He saw, in short, that he was being offered the one thing he had wanted since he was 11 years old and had learned that his parents were dead and that no amount of love or courage or wanting would bring them back. He was being offered power over the ending, and he saw that it would cost him the very thing that made the power worth having. The vision closed. Harry stood in the dark, remade in his mind if not yet in his substance, and death waited, patient as stone, for the answer that all of eternity had come down to hear. "There's a war," Harry said, the dark inclined. "Up there, where I fell from, there's a war, and there's a man in it who's done to himself, on purpose, out of terror, a cheaper and uglier version of exactly what you're offering me. He's split his soul to hide from you. He's murdered his way to a scrap of the immortality you're holding out to me whole." He looked up into the attention that had ended everything. "You know all this. You've been waiting for him the way you wait for everyone, waiting for the day the last of his little anchors breaks and he comes to you grasping and afraid like the first two brothers." "I have," said Death, and there was distaste in it, the distaste of a connoisseur for a forgery. "He has made of his own ending a thing so crude that I am ashamed to own it. When he comes to me I will not be gentle, but he has not yet come, and meanwhile he unmakes a great deal that was not his to unmake. And if I say yes to you," Harry said, "I go back, remade, able to do to him what he spent his whole life trying to do to everyone else." "You go back," said Death, "as am I master and am I heir, which are the same office under two names. You go back able to do a great many things. What you do with them is yours. I do not moralize, Potter. I am the end of moralizing. I will not tell you to be good, for good and ill are the concerns of the living, and you will be only half among them. I will tell you one true thing, and you may do with it what you like. Tell me. Every power I am offering you," said Death, "you will be tempted to spend on the past, to call back what you have lost, to punish what took it. And every thread you spend on what is already ended is a thread you do not spend on what still lives." The dark came very close. "The first two brothers spent theirs on the past, the third spent his on his son. That is the whole of the story, and it is told badly, and now you have heard it true." Harry was quiet for a long moment in a place where moments meant nothing. Somewhere infinitely above him, on the other side of a gray curtain, a man with gray Azkaban thin hair was on his knees on a stone dais screaming a name. And a woman with a storm of black hair had stopped laughing because even she, who loved the ending, had felt something walk past her that the ending itself had paused to look at. And the war went on, and the whispers went on, and the last light of the departed dead had gone up and out, leaving Harry alone at the bottom of everything with the oldest offer in the world laid open before him. He thought of Sirius screaming. He thought of his parents whom he could not remember and could not stop missing, and of the graveyard and of the green light, and of every ending that had ever been dealt to him or near him, the whole leisure of his loss, and he felt the pull toward the past that Death had warned him of, felt it like a tide, felt how easy it would be to say yes for the wrong reason, to reach for the throne so that he might reach through it and drag back everything the dark had taken. And he understood that if he said yes for that reason, he would spend himself to nothing in a year, chasing ghosts up the corridor, and there would be no Harry left at the end of it, only another cold door for the living to fear. So he did the hardest thing he had ever done, which was to want the right thing. "Not for them," he said. His voice, the voice of the dead, was steady now. "Not to bring anyone back, not even for what he did to me." He lifted his ruined face to the end of all things, and he found, somewhere down under the burned room, the 11-year-old who had walked into the forbidden forest because someone else was frightened, the one who had always gone toward the thing rather than away from it. "For what he's still doing, to people who are still alive, that's the only reason I'll take it. If I forget that reason, if you ever see me spending it on the dead instead of the living, I want you to take it back." The dark was silent for so long that Harry thought perhaps he had said the one wrong thing, had failed the maze at its final turn. Then Death did the thing that Harry would remember when he had forgotten the taste of bread and the gold of June, and nearly everything else that had made him a man. It bowed. The whole vast weather of it, the storm that stood over the sea of all endings, inclined toward the ruined scrap of a schoolboy at the bottom of the world, and the ending sewn into its dark robe rang faintly as they moved, a sound like the tolling of every bell that had ever tolled for anyone, and when it spoke again the near-infinite gentleness had in it at last the thing that had been growing all along. "IGNOTUS said very nearly that," said Death. in very nearly those words. It has been 700 years. The dark straightened and gathered and began the terrible work of remaking. He felt it begin in the 3 points that were no longer cold but blazing in the burned and open place where his self had been. Welcome then, Potter. Welcome to the office that has waited since the third brother laid down his cloak. You have looked ATME 4 times. The remaking took hold of him, and it was fire, and it was frost, and it was the ringing of the cord multiplied 1,000-fold. He had imagined dying many times in the idle, grim way of a boy who has been hunted since infancy, and he had imagined it as an ending, a door swinging shut. This was the door swinging open. The 3 points of him that had been cold and were now blazing reached out and found the whole of him, and began to fold it the way a smith folds steel, again and over again, driving out what was soft and could not hold an edge, keeping what was hard, and it should have been agony and it was not. Or it was an agony so far past the human scale that the word came loose from it and floated away. He felt the used thing he had been, the body twitching on a dais under London, receding from him like a coat dropped on a floor by someone leaving a warm house for the cold. He felt the office pouring in to take its place, vast and patient and terrible, and he felt himself being made large enough to hold it, and the making did not ask his permission because he had already given it once in the only words that had ever mattered, not for the dead, for the living. Harry Potter, dead beneath London, felt himself begin to be poured into a new and dreadful shape, and the last thing he heard before the making swallowed the world was the oldest voice in existence, close as his own thought, saying the words that would be true of him from that hour until the ending of everything. Look at me a 5th time, said Death, and this time do not blink. He did not blink. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the sovereign of the threshold, he came back to himself the way a bell comes back to silence from the outside in. The remaking had ended, or it had reached the place where it could pause and let him look at what it had made, and Harry found that he was standing. He had a body again. That was the first fact, and he examined it the way a man examines a house he has been told is his but has never seen. 2 hands. He turned them over. They were his hands, the same nicks and calluses, the faint white line across the back of the right one where a branch had opened it in second year, and they were also not his hands, because when he held them up against the dark of the country around him, they did not block it. The dark showed faintly through his fingers, the way the grain of old glass shows through a candle flame, and where his pulse should have beaten there was instead a slow, steady tolling, felt rather than heard, as though somewhere very far inside him a great door was being opened and closed at the pace of something with all the time there had ever been. He was clothed. He had not asked to be. He wore black, plain and well-made, the black of a thing that has decided not to draw attention because it no longer needs to, and over his shoulders lay a weight he knew, the cloak, his father's cloak, except that it had changed as he had changed, and it no longer hid him from the world so much as it hid the world from what he had become. He could feel it wanting to be worn. He could feel all 3 of them wanting to be worn, the wand along his arm and the stone against his hand and the cloak on his back, and he understood that they were no longer objects he possessed but organs he had grown, and the understanding sat in him without weight because there was no longer anywhere in him for such an understanding to press. He looked up and he saw the country of the dead by its own light, and no word he had was equal to it. It was not a landscape. Landscapes have edges, a place where the land agrees to become the sky, and this had no such agreement. It went on. Under a firmament with no stars in it there ran a plain of pale gray that was not stone and not water and not mist but partook of all 3, and across the plain at intervals the eye could not measure stood the architecture of endings. He had glimpsed them falling. Standing among them was another matter. There were arches like the one beneath the ministry, thousands of them, tens of thousands, ranked to the vanishing point, each with its gray veil stirring in a wind that touched nothing else. And he understood without being told that each arch was a door in some far place in the living world, a battlefield, a hospice, a nursery, a gallows, and that through every one of them at every moment someone was arriving. There were rivers, dark and enormous and slow, and the rivers ran toward a shore he could not see but could feel, the pale strand where the light that was not a sun waited to take the risen up and out. And over all of it lay the sound, the layered whispering he had learned to read in the fall, the last words of everything, not sorrowful and not glad, only continuing. He stood in the middle of it, small and translucent and remade, and he did not flee, and that was the whole of why he was permitted to be there. You are looking for the walls. Death was beside him. It had not approached, it had simply resolved, the way a shape in fog resolves when you stop trying to see it and let it come. In the country that belonged to it, it was somehow less overwhelming than it had been in the dark of the fall, not because it had grown smaller, but because here everything was of its scale, and a thing is only monstrous against the ordinary. Here there was no ordinary. Here death was the ordinary, and Harry, standing translucent beside it, was the strange one. I keep expecting a horizon, Harry said. There is none. The living build horizons because they cannot bear a thing without an edge. Death's attention moved over the ranked arches, unhurried, proprietary. You will unlearn the habit. It will take you longer than you think, for you are still mostly made of habits, and that is the part of you I have left intact, at some cost to my craft, because you asked me to. I didn't ask you to, you asked for it without knowing that you asked. Death turned its regard on him, and the ending sewn into its dark robe caught what passed for light and gave none of it back. When you set your condition not for the dead, for the living, you made yourself a thing that must keep one foot among the warm. A clean instrument would have been easier. I have made clean instruments before in other AGES for other purposes, and they served without flaw and without mercy and without one moment of the thing you would call a self. The regard deepened. You will be harder to keep whole, you will also be worth keeping. I have not decided whether that is a bargain or a folly. It has been 700 years since I last had occasion to wonder. Harry looked at his half-transparent hands. You keep saying 700 years, Ignatus. The last one who could stand where you stand. Death began to walk, and Harry walked with it, and the plane of gray rearranged itself under their feet so that the arches they wished to reach came to them rather than making them cross the distance. He did not take the office. He was offered it as you were, and he refused it as you did not. He had a son he wished to return to and a weariness in him that wanted the long rest more than it wanted the long labor. So he greeted me as an equal and went up with the rest, and the office stood empty, and I went back to keeping it alone. The tolling in Harry's chest seemed to slow, listening. You are the first to say yes. Understand what that means. The Hallows were never a gift to men. They were a question I asked the world, and for 7 centuries the world answered wrong, and now it has answered right, and I find that I am not entirely sure what to do with a correct answer. That makes 2 of us, Harry said. The country of the dead did the thing again that was almost laughter, the mountain thing, the granite pleasure, and the arches nearest them stirred in their gray veils, and something like a wind moved through the rank doors of the dead. Death brought him to one of the arches. It was no different from its 10,000 neighbors, a span of gray stone with a stirring curtain hung in its mouth, and Harry stood before it and found that he could see through the curtain as he could see through his own hands, which was to say that the gray thinned when he asked it to, and behind the gray was the world of the living. He was looking into a hospital room. There was late sun through a high window and dust turning in the light, and a machine somewhere counting out a rhythm that was beginning to fail. And in a bed a man very near the end of a long life lay with his family around him, and none of them could see the arch, because the arch was on Harry's side of things and they were on the warm side, and the 2 sides only touched at the exact place where the gray hung. He watched the man die. It was not violent and it was not a spectacle. It was the oldest and most ordinary thing in the world, the thing the whole country beyond was built to receive. And as the machine's rhythm went flat, the man rose out of the bed, or something of him did, a shape that gathered itself and turned, and it came toward the arch without fear, because the dying had spent its fear already in the bed. And it stepped through the gray and past Harry into the plain, and it did not so much as glance at him. It walked toward the nearest river like a man walking toward a train he has waited all day to catch. They do not see you, said Death, at first. The newly come are still full of where they have been. They will see you later on the bank if they look back, and some of them will, and you must let them. The regard rested on the family gathered around the emptied bed, who had begun on the far side of the gray to weep. You will learn to stand at any arch in the world and watch this. You will learn that it is not cruelty. The worm will always call it cruelty, because the worm measure a life by its length and I measure it by its completeness. That man is not diminished, he is finished. There is a word the living have almost forgotten, and the word is enough, and it is the truest word in my country. Harry watched the family weep for a life that its owner had just walked away from without a backward look, and he understood, standing between the grief and the man who had left it, exactly how alone the office was going to make him, because he could see both sides of the gray at once now, and no one who could only see one side would ever again be able to reach him across the difference. Enough, he repeated, and turned the gray opaque with a thought and shut the hospital room away. They came to a river. It was the nearest of the enormous, slow, dark waters, and up close it was not water at all, but something Harry's remade eyes could look at directly, and his remembered mind refused to name. It ran with the risen. He could see them now as more than a stream of far lights. He could see them as they were, moving in the current, not like drowning things but like swimmers who have at last stopped fighting the sea, faces turned toward the far invisible shore, and their number was the number of everyone, and the sight of it was too large to be borne, and he bore it, because the office in him had made a place where such sights could be set down. Do not touch the river, said Death. Harry had not moved to. Why? Because you can. Death's regard was on him, weighing. That is the whole of your new condition, Potter, and you had best learn it at the edge of something small before you learn it at the edge of something you love. A living man could stand on this bank until his body failed, and he would not be able to change one soul's course by the width of a hair, for the living have no purchase on the dead. You have purchase. You could reach into that current and take hold of one of them and pull, and it would come. Harry looked at the river of everyone, and the pull he had felt in the fall came back, the tide toward the past, and somewhere in that current he knew, without needing to be told, were faces he would have given the rest of himself to see. And the cost, he said. His voice was steady. He made it be steady. Death did not answer in words. It made him a demonstration, which Harry would come to understand was its preferred grammar. The oldest thing in the world did not explain, it showed, because explanation is for pupils and demonstration is for heirs. A single soul detached from the near edge of the current, not by Harry's doing but by Death's, a courtesy and a lesson. It drifted toward the bank, and it took a shape as it came, the way the dead take shapes, and the shape was an old woman, small and stooped and ordinary, the kind of woman who had lived 80 years in a village no map bothered with and had died in her own bed with her own name still on her, and she looked at Harry with the mild and curious eyes of one whose long story is finished and who is content to have it so. Take her hand, said Death, not to keep her, only to hold it. so that you know the price of the smallest of your new acts before you are tempted to the largest. Harry reached out and took the old woman's hand. It cost him June. He had not known until it was gone that he carried a particular afternoon folded up inside him. The gold light on the lawn at the burrow, the smell of cut grass and Mrs. Weasley's cooking through an open window, Ron laughing at something, the specific warmth of belonging somewhere for the length of one perfect ordinary hour. He had not thought of it in months. It was simply there, one of the thousand warm threads that tied him to the world of the living, and when his remade hand closed around the dead woman's hand, the thread paid out of him silently, completely, and was gone. He would remember afterward that there had been such an afternoon. He would not be able to feel it. The gold had a gray edge on it now, the color of the plane, and it would keep that edge for as long as he existed, which was going to be a very long time. The old woman's hand was warm in his. That was the cruelty of it, the exact and surgical cruelty of the office. The dead were warm to him now, and the living would learn to be cold. He let go. The old woman smiled at him without understanding what she had cost him, because she had cost him nothing. The price was his alone, the price was always the toucher's alone, and she drifted back into the current and turned her mild eyes once more toward the shore and was carried up and out with the rest, one soul among the number of everyone, her long ordinary story finished and paid for by no one but him. Harry stood on the bank with June grayed out inside him and said nothing for a while. "You see," said Death at last, and there was no cruelty in it, which was somehow worse than cruelty. There was only the terrible evenness of a thing stating a law. That was one hand, that was a stranger, held for a moment and not even kept. Imagine the price of a hand you would not let go of. Imagine the price of pulling one back up that river against the whole weight of its finished story. The regard settled on him. You could do it. That is what you must never forget, and what will destroy you if you forget it. Not that you cannot, that you can. How much, Harry said, to bring someone all the way back from where they've already gone. The country of the dead was quiet. More than you have, said Death, for any one person. For any one of the ONES you would ask FOR. Its voice did not soften, and its not softening was a kind of respect. The arithmetic is simple and it is merciless. A life that has ended is a debt paid in full. To reverse it is to pay the debt a second time out of your own account, and the account is the warmth that makes you Harry. You might spend everything you are and buy back one. And then there would be one of them walking in the sun again, and there would be no YOU. Only ME wearing your face, keeping your office, and not remembering why it had once seemed worth doing. Harry looked at his hands, through which the gray plane showed. "Then I won't," he said. "You will want to. I know I'll want to every day." He closed his transparent hands into fists, and the wand and the stone and the cloak stirred against him, wanting to be used. "That's not the same as doing it." "No," said Death, and there was in the single syllable something that had not been there at the start of him, something that had grown across the fall in the offer and now the river, a thing that in a smaller creature would have been called regard, and in this one had no name because it had never before had an object. "It is not." And it let the matter rest and turned him from the river, and the gray plane rearranged itself once more, and they walked on into the country that was now appallingly partly his. Not all of the dead were in the river. Harry saw them as they walked on from the bank, a scattering of shapes that stood where the current ran shallow, half in and half out, their faces turned not toward the far shore but back the way they had come, toward the arches, toward the warm world they had left. They did not move with the others. They did not go up. They stood in the shallows with the water of the finished story pulling at them, and they refused it. And their refusal had worn them thin, thinner than the risen, thin as breath on cold glass, so that Harry could see the gray plane straight through them. "What are THUI?" he asked, though the office already half knew. "Homesick," said Death. "That is the only true name for it. THOGH, the living have others. The warm call them ghosts and tell each other that they linger out of malice or unfinished vengeance or some great wrong that holds them. It is almost never so. They linger because they were loved too hard or loved too hard in return, and they could not bear to let the story finish while someone on the far side of the gray was still saying their name. Death's regard moved over them without pity and without scorn, with only the terrible evenness. They may stand there in age. They may stand there until the one who calls them has come down the river too, and found them, and taken their hand, and led them up at last. It is the saddest thing in my country, and it is also a kindness I permit, because even I will not make a soul go home before it is ready." One of the thin shapes turned and looked at Harry. It was a young woman, or had been, and she saw him in a way the newly dead had not, saw the office in him, saw the keeper of the border standing on her bank, and she came toward him through the shallows with her worn face lifting, and she said a name that was not his, the name of someone in the living world she was still waiting for, and she asked him, without words, in the pleading grammar of the long lingering, whether he had come at last to carry her across. Harry could have. That was the whole horror of the office, laid bare again in a single instant on a single bank. He could have taken her hand and finished her, spent a thread of himself and given her the rest she could not give herself, and it would have been a mercy, and it would have been the beginning of the end of him, because there were more of them along the shallows than he could count, and a keeper who began saying yes to mercy would say it until there was nothing left of him to say it with. He did not take her hand. He told her in the same wordless grammar that the one she waited for was still warm, still walking in the sun, and that when their story finished he would see to it himself that they were brought to this exact bank, and that she would not have to look for them in the whole country of the dead. It was not a mercy. It was a promise, which is a colder and more durable thing, and the thin shape took it and drew back into the shallows to keep her long watch. And Harry walked on with one more weight set down in the place the office had made, and did not look back, because looking back was the one habit the boarder could not afford in its keeper. The office settled into him as they walked. It came in the way a language comes to a child, not learned but absorbed, so that by the time he noticed, he knew a thing he could no longer remember not knowing it. He knew the geography of the arches now, could feel them ranked away into the unmeasured distance. And he knew that if he wished he could stand at any one of them and look through into the living place it served, could stand at the arch that was a hospice in Kyoto, and the arch that was a roadside in the Andes, and the arch that was, yes, a stone chamber beneath the Ministry of Magic in London, all at once. Because distance was a horizon, and horizons were a habit he was already beginning to unlearn. He knew that the risen went up and did not come back, and that this was not a rule imposed on them but the shape of their own desire, and that the only ones who lingered on the near bank were those the living held too hard, whose stories the world refused to let finish, and that these became the ghosts, the pale, reluctant remainders, and that he could see them now for what they were, which was homesick. He knew above all the smell of wrongness. That was the closest he could come to it later when he tried to say it to someone with a living tongue. It was not a smell. It was the sense the office gave him of a thing out of place, a note struck wrong in the vast continuing chord, and as they walked he became aware of it, faint and far and persistent, coming from the direction of the living world, from the arch that served London. He stopped. Death stopped with him. "There's something wrong up there," Harry said slowly. "In the world I can feel it. Like a splinter you can't see, like a sound just under hearing." He turned toward the London arch, distant among 10,000 others, and the wrongness pulled at his new senses the way a bad tooth pulls at a tongue. Several of them, scattered, all the same wrongness in pieces, spread out. "Yes," said Death, and its voice had changed. The evenness had a fine edge on it now, the edge of a connoisseur come at last upon the forgery he has heard about for years. "You are smelling what I have smelled for 15 years and been unable to reach. Tell me what it is." Harry closed his eyes, which changed nothing, since seeing here did not depend on eyes, but the habit steadied him. He reached toward the wrongness as he might have reached toward a sound in a dark house, and the office reached with him, and he found them, not their places but their shapes. 7 wounds in the world, or 6 now, and one that moved. One that walked and breathed and hated, 7 places where a soul had been torn and a piece of it hammered into some vessel to keep the whole from coming home to the river. And each piece screamed silently the way a splinter of bone screams under skin, because it did not belong on the living side of the arch, and every instant of its existence was a small blasphemy against the country of the dead. "Soul," Harry said. "Someone's torn their soul apart, on purpose, split it into pieces and hidden the pieces so that when the body dies the rest of it can't come here, can't finish, can't cross." He opened his eyes. "So he can't die, that's what it is, that's a man refusing the river." "Viol mort," said Death, and it was the only time in all of it that Harry heard the oldest thing in existence speak a living man's name, and it spoke it the way a healer speaks the name of a disease. "He has made of himself 7 wrong notes. He calls Them Hor Serioxes. He believes they make Him deathless." The regard turned full upon Harry, and it was the whole of the reason Harry had been permitted to be. "They do not. They make Him unfinished. There is a difference, and you are the first being in 700 years who can teach it to Him." Harry held still and let the office count them for him. It was like listening to an orchestra and being able suddenly to pick out every instrument that was playing flat. 7 wrong notes, and the office told him what it could have each without telling him where, because where was a horizon and the office had not yet taught him to fold that particular distance. One note was old and cold and buried deep, held in metal, sunk in earth, a thing with a hollow ring to it that had once meant a great deal to the man who made it. One was gold and vein and hidden high, a cup, he thought, though the impression came as taste and not as sight, sweet and metallic at once. One lay in a house of snakes and grief in a ring, and this note had a second wrongness folded into the first, a thing sewn into it that did not belong to Voldemort at all, that hummed faintly against the office in a register Harry would learn later to call the Hallows. One moved. That was the great snake, the living vessel, and its wrongness slid through the world restless and warm and near its maker. One was a book already silent, a wound the office could feel had been closed by a fang 2 years gone, though the closing had cost a great deal on the warm side, and Harry set the thought of that aside for a later reckoning. And one was close. Closer than any of the others, so close that at first he took it for part of the country itself, a flaw in the gray near at hand. He turned toward it and found that it had no place at all, because it was not out there among the arches. It was on him, it was in him. A splinter of the same wrongness, a thin bright thread of the wrong note woven through the very scar the office could still find on the brow of the body he had left beneath the ministry, and it had been there so long and hummed so quietly under everything else that a living man could carry it his whole life and never know his soul kept a lodger. Harry went very still. "Yes," said Death, and it did not pretend not to have watched him find it. "He made that one without meaning to. The night he came for you in the house that burned, he was already so torn that a piece came loose of its own accord and lodged in the nearest living thing, and the nearest living thing was you. You have carried his 7th wound since you were a year old. It is why you heard his snakes. It is why he could plant a vision in you and walk you to a veil." The regard held him, and there was no cruelty in it, only the law again. In the old arithmetic, Potter, this was the merciless part. The man could not die while his 7 notes sang, and one of the 7 was you, and so the warm world's only hope of ending HIM required the ending of you first. A child raised for a slaughter he did not know was coming. That was the shape of your life before you fell. And now, Harry said, and his voice did not shake because he would not let it, I've already fallen, the scars on a body I walked out of, so that peace is no longer lodged in a living thing, said Death. You died, and the part of you that was only his did not pass up the river with the rest because it was never yours to carry up. It is still there in the body, waiting. When you return to that body, you will return to it also. The country of the dead seemed to lean closer. But you will not return as its prison, you will return as its master. That is the whole of the difference between what you were and what you are, and he does not know it yet, and that not knowing is the first weapon I am putting in your hand. They came at the end of the walking to a place that was almost a room. It was not walled, for the country had no walls, but the gray plain lifted here into a low rise, and on the rise the ranked arches drew back and left a clear space, and in the clear space the light was different, older, the deep steady no color of the very floor of things. Harry understood that this was the seat of the office. Not a throne, there was no throne, because a throne is a thing the living build to be looked at, and there was no one here to look. It was only a place where the one who kept the country could stand and see the whole of it at once, and it had stood empty for 700 years, and now it did not have to. Death brought him to it. Stand here, it said, and Harry stood, and the country arranged itself around him, and he saw. He saw all the arches at once, and all the rivers, and the far shore and the light, and the whispering resolved for one impossible instant into a thing that was almost a single word, and the word was not a word but a fact, and the fact was that everything ends and that the ending is not the enemy of the thing but its completion. The last note without which the song is only noise that has not yet learned to stop. He saw the risen going up, uncountable, unafraid, and he saw the ghosts on the near bank, homesick, and he saw, far off through the London Arch, the 7 wrong notes screaming their small blasphemies into the world of the living, and he saw his own place in it, the office, the sovereign of the threshold, the one who stood between the country of endings and the land of the warm and made sure the door swung true. And he saw the cost of it laid out plain, the account of his own warmth, the 1,000 threads, June already grayed, and how few of them it would take to do what needed doing, and how easy it would be to spend past need into ruin. And he understood the shape of the rest of his existence, which was to ration himself against his own mercy forever, and never once be free of the wanting. He lifted one half-transparent hand, because the office wanted to be tried and he wanted to know its measure before he carried it back among the living, and the wand that was no longer wood but part of his own arm answered him. He did not cast a spell. There was no spell equal to what moved. He only turned his hand, and along the whole ranked distance of the arches the gray veils leaned toward him at once, 10,000 doors of the dead acknowledging their keeper, and the whispering swelled and then hushed, the last words of everything falling quiet together in the space of a breath he no longer drew, waiting on him. He lowered his hand and gave the country back its voice. It had taken nothing from him to do it, and that was the lesson. Dominion over the dead in their own house cost him nothing, and it was only reaching across the border, only touching the warm, only bending what had already been decided that would be paid for in the coin of himself. He stood in the seat of the office, and he did not flee, and Death watched him not flee, and something was decided that neither of them said aloud. How long, Harry said, when the vision let him go. Up there. How long have I been? How long since the veil? Time runs differently here, I can feel it. The whispering doesn't keep the hours. Time is another horizon, said Death. It does not reach this far. The regard considered him. In the land of the warm, it has been longer than a night and shorter than the morning they have already begun to do for you. You fell in the early summer. You will return to a world that has had time to bury you and build you into a story. They will have decided what your death meant. They will have chosen, each of them, what to do with the fact of it, some to grieve, some to profit, some to pretend it proves the thing they already wish to believe. You will not walk back into the room you left. No one ever does. Harry took that in. He had a sudden clear image of Sirius on the dais, on his knees, screaming, and he set the image down in the place the office had made for things too heavy to carry and too dear to drop. The people I was with in the fight, did they? I do not answer that question for the living, said Death not unkindly, and I will not begin by answering it for you. If they had come to me I would know. None of the 6 you named in your heart has come to me. The regard held his. That is all I will say, and it is more than I have said to anyone, and you will not ask me again, because the day you rule this country well is the day you stop asking it for favors and start paying its prices. None of the 6 had come to him. Harry held that fact against the grey June and found that it was worth the afternoon and more. Then I want to go back, he said. The threshold was the arch that served London, and standing before it Harry could feel the living world on the other side of the grey veil, close and warm and loud, the world he had fallen out of, waiting to be fallen back into. Death stood with him at the arch, vast and patient, and something in its stillness had turned almost reluctant not to let him go, for it was the end of all things and it let everything go but to end the strangeness of having had, for the length of one walk across the country of endings, a companion who did not flee. Hear the terms, it said. For there are terms, and you will keep them not because I compel you but because you are the kind of thing that keeps its word, which is the only reason I risked making you a all. Say them. The first, Death's voice filled the space before the arch. You are my master and my heir, and those are one office, and the office is not a weapon I have loaned you for a war. It is a duty, the door must swing true. While you walk among the living, you will find that things which should end do not, and things which should not end are ended before their hour, and it will be yours to set them right, whether or not it serves your war. You did not only gain a power, you inherited a country and its border and everyone who crosses it. Do you understand? Yes. The second, name no name at the river that you cannot afford to lose. You have felt the price of a stranger's hand. You will not be tested gently again. When the hour comes that you stand on the bank with someone you love in the current and the whole of your warmth in your fist, I will not stop you, for I do not stop in my master, and you will have only the thing you brought back with you to stop yourself. Bring back enough. Harry thought of the 11-year-old walking into the forest and of the words he had said in the dark. I brought back the reason, not for the dead, for the living. It will have to be enough. Death inclined, the whole weather of it bowing over him. The third and the last, the regard came very close and the endings in its robe rang faintly. You will be feared, that is not a term I set, it is a fact I report. The living flee me, and you will carry enough of me now that they will flee you also, and some of them will hate you for the fear, and some will worship you for it, and both will be wrong, and you will be alone in a way that Ignotus was spared because he chose the rest instead. Do not let the fear teach you contempt. The moment you begin to despise the warm for fleeing the cold, you have become only the cold, and I will have lost the one thing I made you to keep. Harry stood before the arch that led back to the world, remade, translucent, crowned in nothing anyone could see, and he took the terms into the place the office had made for the things that mattered, and he found that he agreed with all three not because he was compelled but because they were true, and truth had always been the only master he had never been able to refuse. I'll keep them, he said. And when I forget, and I will forget, I'm still mostly made of habits, you said so yourself, you take it back. That was my condition, it still stands. It still stands, said Death. Geo, then master of death. The grey veil of the London arch began to stir wider and wider, the way the veil beneath the ministry had stirred when it took him, except that now it was opening not to swallow but to release. The world has buried you, let it learn what it has put in the ground. Harry stepped toward the veil, and the warmth of the living world came through it to meet him, and he felt the cold in himself answer it. The two of them recognizing each other across the border he was now the keeper of, and he did not hesitate, because hesitation was for those who did not know what waited on the other side, and he knew exactly what waited. A war, a reckoning, a man made of 7 wrong notes. And somewhere in a house that mourned him, the few warm threads he had brought back, the reason he had come, the living for whom the whole terrible bargain had been struck. He put out his half-transparent hand and touched the grey veil, and it parted for its master, and Harry Potter walked out of death and back into the world. Behind him, at the seat of an office that was no longer empty, the oldest thing in existence watched its air go and did not flee, though for the first time in 700 years it had, in a manner it could not name, something to lose. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Return the veil beneath the ministry had been guarded every hour of every day since the summer, and in 4 months not one of the men set to watch it had ever seen it do anything but sway. Corvin Yaxley, no relation to the other Yaxleys and tired of saying so, had drawn the night watch again, which was the watch nobody wanted, because the night watch on the death chamber was 8 hours of sitting on a cold stone bench above a stone pit, looking at an archway that whispered. The unspeakables had wards on it now, layers of them, silver lines chalked and burned and spoken into the dais, because 4 months ago a schoolboy had fallen through the thing during a battle the ministry was still pretending had gone better than it had, and the schoolboy had not come out, and the Department of Mysteries did not like loose ends it could not measure. So they measured it, they watched it. They wrote down that it swayed, and that it whispered, and that nothing came through night after night, and Corvin had stopped listening to the whispering because a man who listened to the whispering did not sleep well, and Corvin needed his sleep. It was the last night of October, and the chamber was very cold, and the arch was whispering, and then it was not. The silence was what brought Corvin's head up. In 4 months the arch had never once been silent. The whispering stopped the way a room stops when someone dangerous walks into it, all at once and from the edges in, and the grey veil, which had swayed without pause since before the ministry was built, hung suddenly still, and then it began to move differently. Not swaying, parting. It drew back from its own center the way a curtain draws back from a window, and behind it there was no wall and no dark and no dais back that Corvin's eyes could account for. There was a country grey and enormous and lit by nothing, and out of the country unhurried a man walked into the death chamber beneath London. Corvin was on his feet with his wand up before he had decided to be. His voice, when it came, was not the voice he had meant to use. Stop, stop where you are. Identify yourself or I'll. The man stepped down off the dais, and the wards did not so much as flicker, and the whispering did not resume, and every candle in the chamber leaned toward him at once and then guttered low, as though the fire in them had recognized something older than fire. He was young. That was the wrongness Corvin's mind kept catching on, even as the rest of it was going white with a terror it had no name for. The man was young, 17 at the most, black-haired, green-eyed, with round glasses and a thin face that a great many wizards would have known on sight, because it had been on the front of every paper in the country for a season, framed in black under the word martyr. But the eyes behind the glasses had nothing young in them. They were the eyes of the thing behind the veil, patient and vast and courteous, and when they came to rest on Corvin, the young unspeakable found that he could not hold his wand up any longer, not because it was struck from his hand, but because his hand had understood before his mind what it was pointing at and had refused. "Put it down," Harry said. His voice was quiet. It carried to every corner of the amphitheater the way water carries. "You'll only embarrass us both." Corvin put his wand down. "You're dead," he said. It came out of him in a whisper. "You went through, nobody comes through. You're the Potter boy, you're dead. They had a service." Dumbledore spoke. "I know what I am." Harry crossed the pit floor, and the cold that came off him was not the cold of the chamber. It was a deeper cold, the cold that stood at the bottom of every grave in England, and it walked ahead of him and made the air taste of frost and turned earth. He stopped an arm's length from the shaking man and looked at him, and the looking left frost on the inside of Corvin's skull. The same frost the old woman on the bank had left, except that Corvin was not dead. Corvin was warm, and the office, and Harry leaned toward that warmth the way a starved thing leans toward a table, and Harry held it back because he had made a promise about contempt and about hunger, and he meant to keep it. "What's your name?" "C. Corvin. Yaxley, no relation." Something moved at the corner of Harry's mouth that was not quite a smile and was worse than a smile. "Corvin Yaxley, no relation. You're going to do something for me, and then you're going to be allowed to go home, and in the morning you're going to tell your masters exactly what you saw because I want them to know, and you're the message." He tilted his head, and the candlelight fell wrong across his glasses, and for an instant there was nothing human behind them at all. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes," Corvin breathed. "Yes, anything." "Good," Harry said. "That's the right answer. Remember that you gave it. It's why you'll live." He let the unspeakable go. That was the first thing he did with his return to the world, and he did it on purpose. As a man lays the first stone of a wall he means to build very tall, he let a witness live and carry his name up out of the earth. He could have taken more from Corvin Yaxley. He could feel exactly how to take it, the office showing him the man's threads, the loose end where his courage tied to his sanity, and how simple it would be to pull. He did not pull. He needed the world afraid of him, and there is a kind of fear that only lives men can carry, and a dead messenger tells no tales in any language the worm can hear. When the unspeakable's footsteps had fled up the stone tiers and the great door had boomed shut behind him, Harry stood alone in the death chamber and looked at the veil he had come through, and let himself feel for one measured moment the size of what had happened. He had died here. His body had lain on that dais, and someone had eventually taken it up, and there had been a service, and Dumbledore had spoken. He turned the fact over. It did not hurt in the place where such things had used to hurt. The office had made that place quieter. But it was there, cold and clear. The world had buried him and made him a martyr and moved on into its war, and he had come back into a house where his own chair had already been given away. The scar on his brow was warm. He had felt it the instant he stepped back into his body on the far side of the veil. The seventh wound, the lodger, the thin bright thread of the wrong note that he had carried since he was a year old, waiting for him in the flesh he had left. It was still there. It hummed under his thoughts, small and vicious, and once it would have owned him, would have shown him visions and pulled his hand toward a false rescue. And now it did nothing but hum because the thing that had put it there did not yet know that the prison had become the warden. Harry laid a finger against the scar and felt the fragment cower from him, a splinter of soul recognizing in horror the country it had spent 15 years hiding from arrived at last and wearing the face it had hidden inside. "Not yet," he told it almost gently. "You're the last one I take. I want you to watch the others go first." The fragment had no answer. It only hummed, and Harry left it where it was, because a man who's going to unmake 7 wounds does not begin with the one sewn into his own head, and because he wanted Voldemort to feel the other 6 die before he understood who was killing them. He drew the cloak's hood up, and the chamber forgot he was in it, and the Master of Death walked out of the Department of Mysteries and up into a London that thought him dead. The city had not changed, and everything had changed. That was the strangeness that walked with him through the small hours, up out of the Ministry's visitor entrance and into a Muggle street slick with October rain. The world of the Worm went on exactly as it had, buses hissing through puddles, a drunk singing to a shuttered shop, the ordinary enormous machine of the living grinding on through the night unaware that anything at all had crossed back over its border. And under it everywhere the war. He could read it now in a way he never could before. Every shuttered wizarding shop he passed had a bitterness to its silence. Twice he felt far off the specific sick lurch in the world that meant a killing curse had found its mark, one in the east of the city and one much further in the country somewhere, and the office in him turned toward each without being asked, marking where 2 more souls had come untimely to the arches, setting the wrongness of it against the ledger of the man who had made this season of dying. The nearer one was still warm. He went to it. He told himself, walking, that it was reconnaissance, that a man beginning a war needs to see how the other side does its work, and that was true, and it was not the whole truth, and he had promised death he would not lie to himself about the whole truth. The whole truth was that a soul had come untimely to his border half a mile from where he stood, and the keeper of the border could no more walk past it than a doctor can walk past a man bleeding in the road. The office had a duty in it. He had agreed to the duty. He went east. The street, when he found it, was a narrow, wizarding cut behind a Muggle laundrette, the kind of half-hidden lane where a wand-maker or an apothecary might keep a shop front the Muggles never quite managed to see. There had been a shop here. There was still a shop here technically, but its door hung off its hinges and its window was blown into the road. and in the doorway lay an old man in a nightshirt who had come down, plainly, to see who was knocking at 3 in the morning, and had been answered with green light for his trouble. Over him stood two men in dark robes and silver masks, and they were not hurrying, because the ministry did not come quickly to this part of the city anymore, and they were talking to each other in the easy tones of men doing a night's work. Had it coming, hoarding dragon hard as he was, price is what they are. Just take the till in the back stock and let's be gone. They both felt the cold at the same moment. It came down the lane ahead of Harry, the grave cold, the frost on the cobbles, the taste of turned earth, and the two masked men turned toward it with their wands coming up. And then they saw what walked in the cold, and their wands did not finish coming up. The taller one made a sound that had no words in it. The cloak's hood was down now. The face under it was the face from the front of every paper in the country, framed in black under the word martyr, and it was looking at them with the patient, enormous courtesy of the thing behind the veil, and the candlelight from the ruined shop fell across the round glasses and found nothing human behind them. "You're dead," the shorter one said. His voice climbed. We saw the coffin, everyone saw the coffin, you went through the veil, you're dead, You keep saying that to me tonight," Harry said. "As though it settles anything." He crossed to the old man in the doorway and crouched, and neither Death Eater moved to stop him, because a rabbit does not lunge at the thing that has walked into the field. The old wandmaker's soul had not gone far. It was rising, gathering, turning toward the near arch that this death had opened, and it was frightened, because it had died fast and afraid and had not had time to spend its fear in a bed the way the old man in the hospital had. And Harry looked at the rising shape of it and made a choice he had been warned about and made it anyway. He put out his cold hand and he touched the frightened soul, and he did not pull it back, because pulling it back was ruin, but he steadied it. He turned its face gently toward the far shore and the light. He took the terror out of its crossing the way you take a splinter from a child's hand, quickly, so the fear of it is over before it is understood. And it cost him. He felt the thread pay out of him, one of the 1,000, and this one was the smell of his mother's hair, which he had not known he still carried. A warmth from before Godric's Hollow that had survived every Dementor and every long night, and it grayed at the edges and was gone, spent on a stranger's easy passage, and the old wandmaker went up unafraid, and Harry knelt in the wreck of the shop a little poorer than he had been, and did not regret it, because this was the job. And the job was the only thing he had left that was clean. He rose and turned to the two men in silver masks. "Go back to him," he said. "To the thing you serve, tell him what you saw, tell him the veil gave something back, and that it knows what he did to himself all 7 times, and that it's coming to collect. Tell him a martyr walked out of the ground on Halloween and set a soul free with his bare hand and let you live to carry the message." The cold deepened and the frost climbed the walls of the ruined shop, and the two men were shaking now, openly the way men shake in the last cold before the end. "And run, I find I would like to watch you run." They ran. He did not go into the arches after them. He had a boarder to keep, and he would keep it, but the rest of the night's dead could wait a few hours for their keeper, because tonight he had a dead of his own to look in on first, and it was not to the dead. His way to Grimmauld Place took him along the edge of a wizarding quarter, past shuttered shops and a wall the war had turned into a shrine. People had come here in the summer, it seemed, to grieve where they could be seen grieving, and they had left flowers that had long since gone to brown paper, and candles burned down to their tins, and dozens of copies of the same photograph pinned and pasted one over another until the brick behind them had vanished. It was his own face. A younger version, laughing at something out of frame, 16 and alive and unaware, and beneath it in 100 different hands the same few words over and over, "The one who stood, and boy who died for us, and simply thank you." Someone had made him a saint while he was learning to be something a great deal older than saints. He stood in front of the wall of his own dead face and felt the distance between what they had needed him to be and what had come back, and he understood that he could never let them see the difference, because a people at war will forgive their champion for dying and will never forgive him for returning as the thing they are most afraid of. 2 witches turned into the lane, cloaked against the rain, and saw him standing barefaced before his own shrine and knew the face and did not scream. They simply went, backward at first and then at a run, their footsteps splashing away into the dark, carrying the third telling of the night out into a city that would not sleep well again. He let them go, as he had let the others go, and drew the hood back up, and walked on toward the one house where the truth of him would be welcome. Number 12, Grimmauld Place, unfolded itself out of the space between numbers 11 and 13, the way it always had, grudging and grim, and Harry stood across the road from it in the rain and looked at the house that had been the nearest thing to headquarters the Order had, and felt the wards on it try to notice him and fail, sliding off him the way water slides off glass, because there is no ward made by the living that can bar the keeper of the last door. A light burned in a downstairs window. Someone was awake in the small hours of Halloween, and Harry knew without reaching who it would be, because he knew whose grief would not let him sleep on this particular night of all the nights in the year. He crossed the road, and the front door opened for him before he touched it. Creature was waiting in the hall. The old house elf stood at the foot of the stairs in his filthy loincloth, and he had come up out of his den to see what had disturbed the wards, and when he saw what stood dripping rain on the doormat, he did not shriek and he did not curse and he did not mutter about blood traitors and mudbloods, as he had muttered at every living thing that crossed this threshold for 30 years. He went very still. His great pale eyes, which had watched a dozen blacks die in this house and had loved exactly one of them, fixed on Harry, and then slowly with a creak of ancient knees Creature bowed. not the mocking half-bow he gave the order. A real one, the bow an old servant of an old family gives to a thing out of the oldest stories, the tales the black elves told each other in the dark about the Peverils and the gift that was not a gift, and the one who would one day come back up the river wearing it. The house elf knows what Master Harry is, Creature said, and his bullfrog croaked to the floor. Creature's mother told Creature, and her mother told her, the cold one, the one death lets walk. He straightened, and something that had been sour in him for 3 decades had gone quiet. Master Sirius is in the kitchen. Master Sirius does not sleep. Creature will bring wine for the guest and salt as is proper for one who has crossed over. And he shuffled off toward the pantry muttering, but the mutter had no venom in it now, only the fret of an old creature who has been given, at the very end of a bitter life, something worth doing. The hall smelled of dust and old smoke and the particular staleness of a house where someone is drinking alone. Sirius Black sat in the kitchen at the long scrubbed table, and he had aged a decade in 4 months. The gray had eaten further into the black of his hair. His face, which had begun the summer merely thin, had gone gaunt, the skin drawn tight over the fine black bones, and there was a bottle in front of him and a glass beside it and a photograph on the table under his hand, and the photograph Harry knew would be of a wedding or of a christening or of 4 young men laughing on a doorstep before the world had taken them apart one by one. Creature was nowhere. The fire had burned down to embers. On the wall, the moth-eaten curtains over Mrs. Black's portrait were still, for once, because even a screaming portrait sleeps, and the only sound in the house was the rain and the slow tick of a clock that had been telling the wrong time since before Harry was born. Harry stood in the kitchen doorway with the rain still on the cloak, and he took the hood down. Sirius did not look up at first. "Creature," he said to the tabletop, his voice roughened by whiskey and by 4 months of very little use, "I told you. Not tonight. Go and do whatever it is you do. I don't want the elf tonight. I don't want anyone tonight." He lifted the glass. "Tonight I want to sit here and drink to the ones I couldn't save, and I'll thank you to leave me to it." "You saved me," Harry said. "That's the thing you've got wrong. You did save me." The glass stopped halfway to Sirius's mouth. For a long moment he did not move at all, and the clock ticked its wrong time, and the rain ran down the black windows, and then Sirius Black turned his head very slowly, the way a man turns toward a sound he has prayed for and dreaded in equal measure for a third of a year, and he saw his godson standing in the kitchen doorway, and the glass fell from his hand and shattered on the stone floor, and neither of them looked at it. "No," Sirius said. Harry said nothing. "No." Sirius was on his feet, and the chair went over behind him, and he had his wand out, and his hand was not steady. "No, you don't get to. I've had this dream every night since June, and I always wake up and you're still cold in the ground. You don't get to be a dream that answers back. Prove it. Prove you're not a trick. Say something only he'd know. Say it." His voice cracked straight down the middle. "Please." "You gave me a 2-way mirror," Harry said quietly, "the Christmas before I went to the ministry, so we could talk without Umbridge's owls reading everything, and I never used it. It was in my trunk that night. I never even opened the package properly, and I have thought about that where I've been more than you'd believe. That there was a way to reach you the whole time, sitting in the bottom of my trunk, and I was too proud or too stupid or too much of a Gryffindor to use it." He held the gray eyes across the little kitchen. "I'm sorry, Sirius, I should have opened the mirror." The wand dropped. Sirius crossed the kitchen and took Harry by the shoulders, and his hands closed on flesh, on bone, on a body that was solid and real and standing in his house, and whatever he had braced himself to feel, it was not the cold. He felt the cold the instant he touched him, the grave cold that walked ahead of the Master of Death, and Harry watched him feel it, watched the joy war with the animal recognition of a thing that was not quite right, and this was the moment he had known would come and had come back anyway to face. "You're freezing," Sirius said. His hands did not let go. "You're freezing your ice. Harry, what happened to you? What did they do to you in there? You're so cold, you're cold as the grave," Harry said. "Yes." He told him not all of it and not the worst of it, but enough. They sat at the long table with the broken glass swept aside and the fire built up again, and Harry told his godfather that he had died, truly died, gone through the veil and down into the country beyond, and that something there had not kept him. He did not use the word office. He did not use the word master. He said that he had been changed, that he had come back different, that there was a cost to the difference and a duty in it, and that he had chosen it with his eyes open, and Sirius listened with his gaunt face working and his hands wrapped around a mug of tea he did not drink, because tea from Harry's hands came to the table already going cold. "Dumbledore said the veil was death," Sirius said when Harry had finished. "He said no one who passed through it could return. He said it the day we buried an empty coffin because there was nothing to bury. You'd gone through, so it was an empty box and a stone with your name on it in Godric's Hollow next to James and Lily. And Dumbledore stood up in front of the whole order and said the kindest thing he could think of, which was that you were beyond our reach now at peace and that we would honor you by finishing the war you died in." His mouth twisted. He believed it. I watched him believe it. Albus Bloody Dumbledore, who's never been wrong about anything in his life, stood there and told a room full of grieving people that you were gone for good. "He was wrong," Harry said. "He was wrong." Sirius laughed, and there was no humor in it, only a raw disbelieving edge. "God, I want to see his face. I want to walk you into the next order meeting and watch Albus Dumbledore be wrong for once in his long, clever life." He stopped because Harry had gone still in a particular way, and Sirius Black had spent his life reading rooms, and prison had sharpened rather than dulled it. What is it? You've got the look James used to get right before he did something that got us all detention." "Tell me what's happened," Harry said. "Out here since June I can feel the shape of it, but I can't read a newspaper with the office. Tell me how bad." Sirius told him, and it was bad. Fudge was gone. The night the battle at the Ministry ended, the Minister for Magic had walked into the atrium and seen Voldemort in the flesh with his own frightened eyes. A year too late, after a year of calling Dumbledore a liar and Harry a disturbed attention-seeker in the pages of the Prophet, and there had been no surviving that. They had put Scrimgeour in his place, a harder man, an old Auror who talked tough and arrested the wrong people to look busy and had not once in 4 months landed a blow that mattered. The disappearances had started in July and had not stopped. Whole families gone between one night and the next, their houses left standing and empty with the kettle still warm. Dementors off their leash and breeding in the Channel fog so that even the Muggles had begun to notice their summers going gray and their sorrows going deep. Giants in the north. A bridge down over the Thames with people on it, called an accident by the papers and called a message by everyone who could read one. In the order, what was left of it, meeting in the dark and burying its own because Voldemort no longer needed to hide, and a war fought in the open against a man who could not die was a war of arithmetic, and the arithmetic was going the wrong way. Dumbledore holds it together, Sirius said. Somehow, he always does. But he's tired, Harry. I've known Albus my whole life, and I've never seen him tired before. His hand, the right one, it's gone black, some curse he won't talk about. He keeps it in a glove. He looks like a man carrying something he can't put down. He turned his glass without drinking. And he blames himself for you, that much I'll give him. Whatever else is true, the day we buried that empty box, Albus Dumbledore looked older than the castle. Losing you took something out of him that hasn't come back. It'll come back, Harry said, when he sees me. And then it'll go again when he understands what he's seeing. He turned the cold mug on the table once and looked at the ring it left. How much do you know, he said, about why I was at the Ministry that night? They talked until the black windows began to go gray. Harry laid it out for him piece by piece, in the flat, quiet voice the office had given him, and Sirius, who had loved James Potter and lost him to a secret kept badly, listened to the architecture of the secret that had been kept about James's son, and his gaunt face went from disbelief to something harder as the pieces came together. The prophecy first. That there had been a prophecy made before Harry was born that had marked him and Voldemort for each other, and that Dumbledore had known its contents since that night and had never once told Harry, had let him grow up not knowing why the most dangerous wizard in the world wanted him dead. So that Voldemort, who knew only that a prophecy existed, had spent a year trying to lure Harry to the Ministry to hear it. That the whole trap at the Death Chamber had been built on a secret Dumbledore chose to keep, the occlumency next. That Dumbledore had known Voldemort could reach into Harry's mind through the connection between them, had known it for a year, and had responded by refusing to look at Harry, by putting a wall of cold distance between them all through the worst year of Harry's life, and by handing the delicate work of teaching Harry to close his mind to Severus Snape, of all the wizards in Britain, a man who hated the son of James Potter with a hatred that had curdled 20 years in the dark. That the lessons had failed, predictably, and that the failure had left the door in Harry's mind wide open for the vision that walked him to the veil. And under all of it, the shape that Sirius saw before Harry named it, because Sirius had seen the edges of it for years and had never let himself finish the picture. That Harry had been raised the way a weapon is raised, kept at the Dursleys, where he would be humble and hungry and grateful for any scrap of belonging, brought into the magical world knowing nothing so that he would attach himself to the first hand that was kind, and pointed always gently, unfailingly, toward the confrontation that a prophecy said only he could win or lose, not out of malice. That was the part Harry was careful to say plainly because it was true and because the truth was colder than malice would have been. Dumbledore loved him. Dumbledore had wept at the empty coffin. And Dumbledore had spent 15 years arranging Harry's life around a war Harry did not know he was born to fight because Dumbledore had decided long ago and alone that the cause was worth the child. He loved me, Harry said, and he aimed me, both, at the same time. That's the thing I've had a long while to understand in a place where you have a great deal of time to understand things. It wasn't cruelty. Cruelty would have been easier to forgive. He looked up and his eyes were very green and very old. He decided what I was for before I could talk, and then he was sad about it, and then he did it anyway. Sirius sat with his ruined face in his hands for a while. What are you going to do? He said at last, through his fingers. It was not really a question. He had spent a summer watching this godson walk toward danger rather than away from it, and he had a fair idea of what the answer was going to be, and the thing that had come back from the veil frightened him in a way the danger never had. There's a man, Harry said, who split his soul into 7 pieces so he'd never have to answer for anything he's done. I can feel all 7 from here. I'm going to take them apart one at a time, and I'm going to make sure he feels each one go, and at the end of it he's going to stand in front of me as mortal as the day his mother died bearing him, and he's going to learn what the word means. He turned the cold mug once more. And before I get to him, there are some people who lured a 15-year-old to a room full of Death Eaters and put a curse through a curtain, and I'm going to have a conversation with each of them. And there's an old man with a wand that isn't really his, who's going to have to sit across a table from the weapon he built and hear it explain that it's awake now and it isn't his either. Harry, Sirius lowered his hands. The Harry I knew wanted Voldemort stopped. He didn't want this. This sounds like something else. This sounds like revenge. Harry's voice did not rise. That was the thing Sirius would remember afterward, the flatness of it, the way the cold came off the words like mist off ice. I gave that up at the Vale. Revenge is a thing you spend on the past, and I made a promise not to spend myself on the past. I'm not going to touch them for what they did to me. That's finished. That's paid." He leaned forward, and the embers in the grate leaned away from him. "I'm going to reach them for what they're still doing to the people who are still alive. Bellatrix Lestrange is out there tonight, and she's going to kill someone before this war is over, someone with a name and a mother, and I am the only thing in the world that can walk up to her and take that away from her. That's not revenge, Sirius, that's the job I took. The revenge would be a great deal easier and a great deal warmer, and I'm not allowed to want it." The clock ticked its wrong time. Outside, over the rooftops of London, the last dark before dawn was thinning toward gray, and somewhere in it a bell began to ring the hour. "You saved my life," Sirius said. "At the Vale, you pushed me clear and you took it instead. I've had 4 months to live with that, 4 months of knowing you died so I could sit in this house drinking to ghosts." He reached across the table and put his hand over Harry's, and he did not flinch from the cold this time, though it cost him to hold it. "Whatever you are now. Whatever they made you into down there, you're still the one who did that. I have to believe you're still that. So I'm going to do the thing I should have done the first time instead of sitting here drinking, and I'm going to help you. Not because I like the sound of any of it. Because somebody who loves you should be standing close enough to pull you back if you ever get too far out over that water you keep almost talking about." For a moment Harry did not answer. The office in him had made a place where the heaviest things could be set down, and it wanted to set this down too, the warm hand over his cold one, the offer, the one thread of the living world reaching for him across the border he kept. He did not set it down. He let it stay where it was and be heavy and be warm because death had told him to bring back enough, and he understood now that this was what enough looked like. One man in a ruined kitchen refusing to flinch from the cold. "All right," Harry said. His voice was not quite steady, and he let it not be once in the whole long night. "All right, stay close then." Sirius slept in the end, slumped in the chair by the rebuilt fire, the first real sleep he had taken in 4 months, because a man cannot keep a death watch for a godson who is sitting across the table drinking cold tea. Harry let him sleep. He went to the tall, grimed window of the drawing room and stood looking out over the roofs of a London going slowly gray, and while the city slept he took stock of his enemies the way a general takes stock of a map. He could feel them all if he was still. The 6 wrong notes scattered across Britain and beyond, each singing its small flat song into the fabric of the world. The ring in its house of snakes and grief, the cup hidden high in vain, the locket that rang hollow and cold, the diadem lost somewhere behind a great deal of dust, the snake that moved. And nearer, sharper, not wrong notes, but simply the living, the ones who had built the trap at the Vale. He found Bellatrix Lestrange the way you find a fire in a dark house, by the heat of her, somewhere to the north and west, still burning, still hungry, dreaming her devoted dreams. He found the cold, careful weight of Lucius Malfoy behind the wards of a great house. He found, threaded all through the ministry like rot through a beam, the small gray malices of the people who had made Harry a liar and a target while a war gathered, and among them a particular sweetness that turned his cold stomach pink and giggling and cruel. He was not going to rush. That was the discipline the office had taught him, the patience of a thing that has all the time there has ever been. He would take them in an order, and the order would be its own kind of message. And by the time he reached the man of 7 wounds, there would be no one left who did not understand what had come back up the river. He set the map down in the place the office made for such things, and turned from the window because the first of them was about to knock on the door and had brought, without knowing it, the second of the 3 Hallows to lay in its master's hand. Dawn came gray to Grimmauld Place, and with it unlooked for a knock. Harry felt the visitor before the sound reached the door, felt him as he had felt the 2 killing curses across the city in the night, except that this was not a wrongness in the world but a rightness so old and so worn that it had almost become a landmark, and threaded through it, unmistakable now to the senses the office had given him, was a 4th cold star to set beside the 3 he already carried. Wand-shaped. Ancient. A thing that had passed hand to hand down a river of murder for centuries, and that had never once in all that river found the one man it was truly waiting for. The elder wand had come to Grimmauld Place, and it had come in the hand of the man who thought he owned it, and Harry stood up from the table as the knock sounded a second time, and he looked at the door with the eyes of the thing behind the veil. "That'll be him now," he said. Sirius went white. "Dumbledore, here, he can't." "Harry, he can't see you, not like this, not before we've had time to think." "He can," Harry said. "It's exactly what I want. Let him in, Sirius. It's time the old man learned what he built." Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The ledger Albus Dumbledore had come to Grimmauld Place because a witness had walked out of the Department of Mysteries at 4 in the morning babbling about the Vale, and because a man who has spent his whole life being right about terrible things learns to go and look at the ones that frighten him. He stepped into the hall with the rain sheeting off his traveling cloak, and Sirius, roused from the chair by the knocking, was already there ashen, saying something meant to warn him, and Dumbledore was not listening because he had felt it the instant the door opened. The cold, not the cold of the house or the night. A deeper cold, familiar to him in a way that turned his old blood to water, because Albus Dumbledore had spent a lifetime studying death from the safe side of the glass, and here was the glass gone and the thing itself standing in a kitchen doorway wearing a face he had helped to make and had wept over losing. "Hello, Professor," Harry said. For a long moment the greatest wizard of the age did not speak. His half-moon glasses caught the light. His right hand, gloved in black leather, hung at his side, And Harry could see through the glove as he could see through most things now, could see the curse eating up the arm, the slow blackening rot of a man who had reached for something that did not want to be reached for, and had paid the toll All Hallows charged to the unworthy. Dumbledore's eyes moved over Harry, and there was grief in them, real grief, and under the grief a swift and dreadful calculation, the machine behind the twinkle beginning even now, even here, to turn. Harry, Dumbledore said at last, and his voice was not steady. They told me the veil gave something back. I did not let myself believe it. I have not let myself hope for anything in 4 months, because hope, in my experience, is the cruelest of the instruments. He took a step forward. Truly you? That's the wrong question, Harry said. You know it's me, you can feel it's me, what you want to know is whether it's only me. He came out of the doorway into the hall, and the candles bent away from him, and the black-gloved hand twitched, and Dumbledore did not step back, which cost him, and both of them saw that it cost him. Sit down, Professor, we're going to have the conversation we should have had years ago. You've owed it to me for a long time, and I've come a long way to collect. They sat in the drawing room, the three of them, under the moth-eaten tapestry of the black family tree with its burned-out faces. Dumbledore sat with his ruined hand resting on the head of his cane and his blue eyes steady on Harry, and he had gathered himself now, put the grief away where he kept the things that could be used against him, and become again the man who had outthought Gellert Grindelwald and Tom Riddle and half a century of lesser schemers. Harry watched him do it. He knew the machine well, he had been a component in it once. You went looking for it in the summer, Harry said. He nodded at the black hand. The resurrection stone, it's in a ring in a ruined house in Little Hangleton, and you knew that, and you went for it, and the curse on it nearly killed you and will finish the job inside the year. You reached for the second Hallow. His voice was very quiet, very even. You've been collecting them your whole life, haven't you? The wand first. You won it off Grindelwald in 45, and you've carried it ever since and told no one what it was. And now the stone, 2 of the 3. You've owned my cloak's history too, in a manner of speaking. You borrowed it off my father the week before he died to examine, you said. 3 Hallows, Professor. You've spent a lifetime trying to gather the 3 Hallows, and you nearly had them, and you never once understood what they were for. Sirius's head came up. Albus, what is he talking about? He is talking, Dumbledore said slowly, not taking his eyes from Harry, about the great sin of my youth which I had believed known to no one living. The blue eyes had gone very careful. How do you know these things, Harry? Even I did not know the stone's precise resting place until this summer. Even I, because I'm what you were pretending to collect trinkets in the hope of becoming, Harry said. You wanted to master death, Albus. You and Grindelwald, 2 clever boys with a slogan, for the greater good, dreaming of the day you'd conquer the last enemy. You spent 60 years wanting it and being ashamed of wanting it and wanting it anyway, and you never came within 1,000 miles of it because you were trying to buy it with objects and it was never for sale. He leaned forward. The room seemed to darken at the edges. I have it, not the objects, the office. I died in that chamber, and I was offered the thing you spent your life aching for, and I took it, and I am sitting in your face right now, and every wand in this room knows it. And the Elder Wand answered him. It came out of Dumbledore's sleeve of its own accord, tearing free of the hand that had held it for 50 years, and it did not fly across the room because Harry did not call it. It simply turned in the air, wrenching against the old man's grip until his blackened fingers opened, and it hung there quivering between them, its length pointed at its true master like a compass needle that has found, after 5 centuries of murder and theft, the pole it was made to seek. The whole tapestry of burned-out faces stirred. Sirius had his wand half raised without knowing why, and Albus Dumbledore stared at the death stick, the wand he had won in the most famous duel of the age, the wand he had believed no man could take from him, straining out of his hand toward a 17-year-old who had not so much as gestured, and the last color went out of his face. It was never yours, Harry said. You only borrowed it, same as the stone, same as everything. He looked at the trembling wand, and then deliberately he sat back and folded his cold hands in his lap and did not take it. Keep the stick, Professor. The wand hung in the air, uncertain. Keep it, Harry said again. Fly it back to Hogwarts, fight your war with it. It's only wood, the mastery isn't in the wood, it never was, and I don't need a wand any more than the sea needs a bucket. But we both know now, don't we, that it answers to me. That everything you built your defense on answers to me. That the greatest weapon of the age is loyal in its wooden heart to the weapon you made and lost and buried and mourned. He let that sit in the cold air of the room. Take it, carry it, and every time you raise it against a Death Eater, remember whose hand it truly belongs in, and remember that I let you hold it. That's the arrangement. That's how this is going to work between us. The wand drifted back toward Dumbledore slowly and settled into the black glove and lay there quiet, and Dumbledore looked down at it as a man looks at a dog he raised from a pup that has just for one instant shown him its teeth. I want to say, Dumbledore began, that I am sorry. I know you're sorry, Harry said. You've been sorry for years, sorry as the water you swim in. It's never once stopped you doing the next thing. He turned the resurrection stone's absence over in his mind, the wrong note of the ring waiting in Little Hangleton, and set it aside for later. I'm not here for your apology, Professor, and I'm not here to hurt you, though I want you to understand very clearly that there is nothing in this house or in your castle or in the whole of your long, clever life that could stop me if I chose to, and that I have chosen not to. I want you to sit with that. You spent 15 years arranging my life around your certainty that you knew best. I want you to spend the rest of yours knowing that the thing you aimed has come off the shelf and loaded itself and decided to point where it likes. Harry Sirius started. There was a prophecy, Harry said, still looking at Dumbledore. You heard it before I was born. You knew the night my parents died exactly why Voldemort had come for a baby. And you took me to my aunt's doorstep and left me there with a note. And for 10 years you let me be starved and locked in a cupboard and told my parents died drunk in a car crash, because a hungry, humble, grateful child makes a more biddable weapon than a loved one. And when I came into your world you gave me just enough, always just enough, a friend here, a mentor's smile there, a taste of belonging so that I'd love the world enough to die for it when the time came. You didn't lie to me mostly, you just never told me the truth. There's a difference, and you've spent your life living in the gap between them. His voice never rose, that was the terrible thing, it never once rose. And last year when Voldemort was in my head every night you knew, and your solution was to look away from me for a year and hand me to Snape, and the door stayed open. And he sent me a vision of Sirius dying, and I went because you'd raised me to run toward the danger, and I fell through the veil and I died. That's the ledger, Albus, that's what you owe. I'm not going to make you pay it. I'm just going to make you read it out loud in your own head every day for as long as you have left. The fire had burned low. Dumbledore's face in the dim light had aged past the castle, past the century, into something very near the end of its long road. Every word of it is true, the old man said. I have told myself softer versions for 15 years. I will not insult you by offering one now. He was quiet a moment. I did love you, Harry. That is the part I cannot make you believe, and it is the part that most condemns me, because a man who did not love you would at least have the excuse of indifference. I loved you and I used you, and I told myself the war required it, and perhaps it did, and that is the worst thought I have ever had, and I have had it every day since June. He lifted his blue eyes. What will you do now? My job, Harry said. The one I actually chose instead of the one you chose for me. He stood and the cold rose with him. Voldemort made himself 7 wounds in the world so he'd never have to answer for anything. I'm going to close all 7. You already know about them. I can see it on you. You've been hunting his Horcruxes in the dark for a year. So here's my one act of mercy toward you, Professor, in exchange for the cloak you borrowed off my dead father. Stay out of my way and I'll finish the thing you've been failing to finish, and your side will win the war, and you can tell yourself at the end that your weapon worked exactly as designed. But you'll do it on my terms. You'll call off your watchers. You'll tell your order that Harry Potter is dead because the Harry Potter they knew is, and you'll let the thing that came back move in the dark where it works best. He looked down at the old man. Those are my terms. They're better than you deserve. Take them the way you took the wand, and remember who let you. Dumbledore was quiet for a while, and when he spoke again the general had come up under the sorrow, because Albus Dumbledore had never in his life been able to stop calculating, and he had a war to win, and here was a weapon of a scale he had only ever dreamed of, offering to point itself at the enemy. Then let me give you what I have, he said. Not to steer you. You have made it plain that you will not be steered. But because it is intelligence, and intelligence should go where it will do the most good, and I have spent a year buying it dearly. He drew a slow breath. There are, I believe, 6 vessels besides the one you say you carry, a diary which was destroyed 2 years ago in the Chamber of Secrets, though I did not understand until much later what it had been. A ring in the gaunt house which took my hand and would have taken my life. I could not master its protections. A locket that once belonged to Salazar Slytherin, which I have reason to think was stolen from its hiding place by a man whose initials were RAB, and which I have hunted for a year without success. A cup of Helga Hufflepuff's, something of Ravenclaw's lost, and the snake Nagini which he keeps always near him. 6, find them and unmake them, and the 7th, I know where all of them are, Harry said. Dumbledore stopped. I could feel them the moment I came back, Harry said. They scream, Professor, to what I am now, a torn soul in a jar screams like a nerve laid bare, and I have been listening to 7 of them scream from the far side of the veil since before I chose to return. The locket your RAB stole is in this house. It's upstairs in a cabinet. Sirius's brother hid it in, and Creature has been guarding it for years and grieving that he couldn't destroy it, because RAB was Regulus Arcturus Black and he died getting it, and I'm going to give the old elf the ending to that story before this is done. He watched the intelligence land on the old man, watched the machine reel at how far ahead the weapon had already gone. You spent a year in the dark with a candle. I can see in the dark, Albus. That's the whole difference between us now. You keep forgetting it and then remembering it, and the remembering is the thing I came here to give you. Dumbledore bowed his white head. I see, he said softly. Yes, I see. He lifted his blue eyes, and the general went back down under the sorrow, and only the old man was left. And Harry, the reckoning you are about to begin out there with the ones who built the trap, I know you, or I knew the child you were. Be careful that in closing his wounds you do not open new ones in yourself that no office can ever close. Harry was already at the door, drawing up the hood. You don't get to warn me about my soul, Albus, he said without turning. You're the last man alive withstanding to do it. Go home, fight your war, and keep the stick where I can see it. He went out into the grey morning, and the door of Grimmauld Place shut behind him, and Albus Dumbledore sat a long time in the cold drawing-room under the burned-out faces, holding a wand that no longer loved him, and did not in the end weep, because weeping is a thing you do when there is still something to be done about the grief, and there was nothing to be done about this at all. Bellatrix Lestrange was where the heat of her had told him she would be, in a manor house in the north with the dark mark hanging green over the chimneys, and she was happy because she had prisoners. Harry stood on the frozen lawn in the last hour before dawn and read the house the way another man might read a letter. 4 Death Eaters, a dozen sleeping. And in the cellar, three warm, frightened lives, a family taken in the night from a village down the valley, kept for the morning's sport because Bellatrix liked an audience and liked to take her time. He could feel her moving through the house above them, restless, delighted, humming to herself, the great mad furnace of her devotion burning as bright as it had burned the night she sent a curse through a curtain and by the grace of an accident missed the man she aimed at and took the one behind him instead. She had never known she killed him. That was the thought Harry turned over on the frozen lawn. She had aimed at Sirius, and Harry had moved, and to this day Bellatrix Lestrange believed she had merely watched a Potter stumble through the veil by his own clumsiness. She did not even know she was on his ledger. He found that he wanted her to know. He found that he wanted, before the end of it, for her to understand exactly what she had done and exactly who had come for it, and he examined the wanting carefully, the way death had taught him to examine every want, and he judged it clean, not revenge. She was going to torture a family to death at sunrise, and he was the only thing in England that could walk into that house and take it away from her, and if she happened to learn the truth on the way, that was Justice's business and not his appetites. He walked up to the front door of the house, and the wards died as he reached them all at once, silently like a held breath let go, and he opened the door and went in. The house knew him before its occupants did. That was a thing he had learned in 4 nights of this work, that a house where killing was done had a grain to it, a way the shadows lay, and that the shadows recognized their landlord. He walked into the hall and the temperature fell with him, and the fires in the sconces drew down to blue, and the portraits on the walls, dark old Death Eater ancestors in their heavy frames, went still and turned their painted faces away, one after another down the length of the corridor, because even oil and canvas will not look at the thing that is coming for the living. Somewhere above, a clock stopped. Somewhere below in the cellar, a child began very quietly to pray, and the office and Harry marked the warm sound of it and set it against the account of the woman upstairs. He did not hurry. He had learned that too. Hurry was a thing the living did because their time was short, and his was not, and there is nothing in all the world so frightening as a slow enemy you cannot outrun. The first two Death Eaters were in the entrance hall. They turned and they saw the cold coming, and one of them got a curse off, a good one. A slashing hex that would have opened a living man from shoulder to hip. It passed through Harry and struck the wall behind him and did nothing, because you cannot cut what has already been cut loose from life. And the Death Eater had one moment to understand this before Harry lifted a hand and closed it, and the man's wand went dark, and his mark went dark, and every warm thread that tied him to the waking world drew taut at once. Harry did not kill him. He put him to sleep, the deep gray sleep of the near bank, the sleep that the long-lingering dead would envy, and laid him down on the marble with his fellow beside him and stepped over them and went on toward the humming. He was aware distantly of the cost, not much. Twin threads, thin ones, the smell of the Hogwarts kitchens at night, and the sound of Ron's laugh on a particular staircase, grayed at the edges and gone. He noted the price and paid it and did not slow. There would be a great deal of this before the end, and a man who flinched at every coin would never spend enough to do the work. Bellatrix met him on the stairs. She came down them like a queen or like a spider, her wand loose in her hand, her heavy-lidded eyes already bright with the pleasure of a new toy because the wards were down and the intruder had come to her and she did not yet understand what she was looking at. "Ooh," she breathed. "What's this then? Someone sent me a present." She tilted her head and her black hair spilled. "You've a familiar look about you, sweetheart. Have we played before? I'd remember. I always remember the ones who scream nicely." And then the candlelight found his face under the hood, and the smile did not falter because Bellatrix Lestrange had never in her life been afraid of anything and did not have the machinery for it, but something behind the smile went still. "No, no, that's a dead boy's face. That's the Potter brat's face. I saw him go through the veil myself. I was there." Her voice changed. "I was there." "You were there," Harry agreed. "You aimed at Sirius. I moved. You've been going around for 4 months thinking you watched a schoolboy trip over his own feet, and the truth is you killed me, Bellatrix. Your curse, your hand. You have come a long way to tell you that, because I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to tell you again." She laughed high and wild and threw the killing curse at him. The green light crossed the space between them, and Harry let it come, and it struck him full in the chest. The curse that had ended his mother, the curse that had ended 1,000,000 souls and sent every one of them down to his country, and it broke against him the way a wave breaks against the foot of a cliff and did not so much as move his hair. The hall went silent. Bellatrix stared at the wand in her own hand as though it had betrayed her. "That's the one, isn't it?" Harry said. "The one that always works, the one nobody survives." He came up the stairs toward her, unhurried, and the frost climbed the banister ahead of him. "It doesn't work on me, Bellatrix. Nothing you have works on me. Do you understand what I'm telling you? For the whole of your life you have been the thing in the dark that other people were afraid of. And I am the thing in the dark that you are about to be afraid of, and you don't even have the shape in you to hold the feeling, and I'm going to give it to you anyway because you have earned it, coin for coin, down in the cellar of this house." He did not raise a hand to her. That was the thing the surviving Death Eaters would try to describe later and fail, because there was no spell in it they could name, no wandwork, no incantation. The Master of Death simply took Bellatrix Lestrange by the wrist, the way you take the wrist of someone you mean to lead somewhere, and he opened, for the length of a heartbeat she did not have, the gray between the worlds, and he showed her the country beyond. He showed her the river. He showed her the number of everyone, the risen going up unafraid, the shore, the light. And then, because she had asked, without knowing she asked, whether they had played before, he showed her the one thing her whole devoted life had been built to avoid looking at. He showed her the arch that would one day serve her master. He showed her Voldemort, the Great Terror, the Dark Lord, the deathless one for whom she had murdered and been mad and thrown away every human thing she might have been. Coming at last to the river as everyone comes, stripped of his 7 wounds, small and shrieking and afraid, dragged down the current he had spent 70 years fleeing, unmade, finished, gone. She had built a cathedral of herself around the belief that he could not die. Harry showed her the hour of his death, cold and certain and not far off, and let her feel for one instant, with the full force of the office behind it, that it was true. Bellatrix Lestrange began to scream. It was not the scream she gave when she was happy. It was the other one, the one she had drawn out of 100 victims and never once made herself, and it went on after Harry let go of her wrist, and it went on while she slid down the wall to sit among the banisters with her wand fallen from her fingers, and it was still going on, thin and endless, when he stepped past her and went down into the cellar. He had not killed her. He had done something the wizarding world had believed impossible. He had shown Bellatrix Lestrange the truth she had organized her entire soul to deny, and there are minds that cannot survive a true thing, and hers was one, and it came apart around the fact of her master's mortality like a house coming apart around a flood. The other 2 Death Eaters of the house found them there. They came at the sound of the screaming, wands out, expecting a victim and finding their mistress on the floor undone and a hooded thing standing over her that had let a killing curse break against its chest, and they did the only sane thing, which was to not raise their wands at all. One of them was young. Harry could see the whole of him in a glance, the fresh mark, the borrowed cruelty, the child underneath who had wanted to be feared and had not thought past the wanting to the day something more feared than he would ever be walked into his house. Harry looked at him and did not touch him and spoke once. "You'll tell it better than she can now," he said. "Go on, both of you, carry it home. Tell them a dead martyr walks, and that he shrugged off the green light like rain, and that he broke Bellatrix Lestrange with a touch and a truth and did not spill one drop of her blood doing it. Tell them the truth is worse than any curse, and that I have a great deal of it, and that I am spending it northward through their ranks, one house at a time. And tell them the last thing they'll learn is the name of the man I'm keeping it all for." The cold deepened until their breath smoked. "Run." They ran, and their running was a better message than any raven, because a man who has seen the thing in the dark carries it in his gait forever after, and every servant of the Dark Lord who looked at those 2 in the weeks to come would read in the set of their shoulders exactly how the war had changed. The message would travel. He had meant it to. Let them find her like this, the fiercest of them, the one who feared nothing, sitting in the wreck of her own certainty and screaming that the Dark Lord was going to die. Let them carry that up the chain to the ears he meant it for. The family in the cellar were alive. A man, a woman, a girl of perhaps 9, bound and bruised and beyond terror into the flat stillness of people who have already said goodbye to each other. They looked up when the cold came down the cellar steps, and the man put himself in front of the others as much as the ropes would let him. And Harry saw the courage of it, the ordinary enormous courage of a frightened father with no wand and no hope making himself a wall, and something in the office bent toward it the way it had bent toward the wandmaker's soul, toward the warm, brave, finite things it was built to receive and could not ever be one of again. He freed them with a thought. Ropes fell away and the bruises faded, because mending the living cost him 2 and he paid it without counting, and the little girl stared at him with the fearless clarity of children who have not yet learned which cold things to run from. "Are you Death?" she asked. The father made a strangled sound and pulled her back. Harry crouched so that his ruined old eyes were level with her fearless ones and considered the question and gave her the truth because she had asked it plainly and the plainly asked deserve it. "I'm the one who makes sure death is fair," he said. "The woman upstairs wasn't going to be fair to you, so I came." He straightened. "Go up the stairs and out the front door, and don't look at the woman on the landing, and don't stop until you're in the village. No one in this house will wake to trouble you. You have a great deal of life left, all 3 of you. Go and spend it." They went. He listened to their footsteps flee up through the silent house and out into the dawn, 3 warm threads he had cut free of the dark, and he stood alone in the cellar a moment with the guttering torch and let himself feel once the only clean thing in the whole long night, that a girl of 9 was going to grow up now who would not have. It was worth a coin. It was worth every coin he had spent. He turned the feeling over and named it to himself, the one naming he allowed himself in the whole gray campaign, and the name was not triumph and it was not vengeance. The name was purpose. He had died with none and been remade with too much, and here at last, in a murderer's cellar with a rescued child's footsteps fading overhead, was exactly the right amount. Sirius was waiting up when he came back to Grimmauld Place, because Sirius had appointed himself, with the stubbornness of a man making up for lost years in a hurry, the one who waited up. He had food on the table which was absurd, and he knew it was absurd, and he had done it anyway, bread and cold meat and a bottle of the good wine from the black cellars, and he sat there in the small hours with the fire built high against a cold that no fire could touch, and when Harry came in out of the dark, Sirius pushed a plate toward him the way you push a plate toward someone you are trying to keep in the world. "Sit," he said. "Eat something. Tell me you did something today that a person could eat after." Harry sat. He did not eat. He had not eaten since he came back, and Sirius had noticed and had said nothing until now, and now he watched his godson tear a corner off the bread and turn it over in his cold fingers and set it down again untouched, and something in the older man's face closed like a fist. "I freed a family," Harry said. "A man, a woman, a girl of 9. Bellatrix had them in a cellar for the morning. They're home now. The girl's going to grow up." He looked at the bread. That's the thing I did today that a person could eat after. I'm just not anymore entirely a person, and I find I've stopped being able to taste the bread. That went a while ago. Tonight it was other things. I spent the smell of the Hogwarts kitchen somewhere on a staircase up north. I spent your laugh actually on the second Death Eater in the hall, the sound of it, the particular sound. I know I used to love it. I can't call it up anymore. It's gone gray. Sirius sat very still. Then stop, he said. Whatever it costs you, stop spending it. We'll find another way, a slower way, Dumbledore's way, curses and swords and dying the ordinary. There isn't another way that ends this year instead of in 10, Harry said. And people die every day of the 10. I'm not going to stop. But he looked up and his eyes were very green in the ruin of the gray, and he made himself hold the older man's gaze because death had told him to bring back enough, and this was the whole of what enough had turned out to be. One man at a table at 3 in the morning refusing to let him vanish. But I'll tell you every time, that's the deal I'll make with you, and I won't make it with anyone else. Every time I spend a piece, I'll come back here and I'll name it out loud to you so that somebody in the world is keeping the ledger of what it's costing me in case the day comes that I stop noticing. You wanted to stand close enough to pull me back. This is the rope. It's the only one I've got. Don't let go of it. Sirius reached across the table and gripped the cold hand hard, as he had gripped it the first night, and did not flinch, though it cost him, and both of them let it cost him because that was the point. I've got it, he said roughly. I've got the rope. Now for God's sake, sit here a while before you go back out. Don't spend anything for an hour, just sit. And Harry sat and did not spend anything for an hour, and it was, in its cold and diminished way, the closest thing to a meal he had taken since the Vale. Word reached the Dark Lord 3 days later, and it did not come the way news usually came to him, in the trembling report of a kneeling servant, though there was that too. It came first in his own body. Lord Voldemort was at Malfoy Manor at the head of a long table, when he felt one of his anchors to the world go strange, not broken, not destroyed, but touched, examined, weighed by something that had no business being able to touch the deepest secret of his flesh. It was the fragment he had never accounted for, the piece he did not know he had lost, the splinter that had gone into the Vale with Potter. He had felt it go dark and cold 4 months ago when the Potter brat fell through the Vale, and had thought it merely severed, an anchor cut loose and drifting harmless in the dark. Now it moved, now it was awake. Now something looked out through it at him, across a great cold distance, with a patience he had spent his whole life refusing to believe in, and for the space of a single breath the most feared wizard in the world, the man who had cut his soul into 7 pieces so that he would never feel this, felt the thing he had murdered his way out of feeling. He felt afraid. It lasted only a breath. He crushed it as he crushed everything, and told himself it was nothing, an echo, a dying nerve. And then Lucius Malfoy's wife came into the hall grey-faced, and knelt, and told him that Bellatrix had been found in the northern house 3 days gone, sitting among the banisters, unhurt, unmarked, and utterly destroyed, screaming to anyone who would listen that the Dark Lord was going to die, that she had seen it, that a dead boy with old eyes had shown her the river and the Lord shrieking in the current, and that nothing they did could make her stop. Lord Voldemort sat very still at the head of the long table. Around him his servants waited, not daring to breathe, and he looked down the length of the polished wood at nothing, and turned over in the great cold engine of his mind the one fact he could not make fit. That Potter was dead, that he had watched Potter die, and that something wearing Potter's dead face was walking through England, touching the untouchable and breaking the unbreakable, and telling his most devoted servant, in words Bellatrix could not have invented because Bellatrix did not have the imagination for despair, that Lord Voldemort was going to die. Find out, he said at last softly to the room, what came back. They scattered to obey and left him alone with the thing he would not name, and Lord Voldemort did what he always did when the world offered him a fact he could not bear. He went to reassure himself of his immortality. He went in his mind along the chain of his anchors, one by one, the way a miser walks the rooms of his vault at night. The cup safe in the deepest vault of Gringotts, under goblin gold and a dragon's misery. The locket safe in a cave by the sea, ringed with drowned men and black water. The diadem safe in the one hiding place in the world he was certain no living soul knew of. The ring safe in the wreck of his mother's people's house under a curse that had already taken the meddling hand of Albus Dumbledore. The snake warm and coiled and near, 5 anchors and himself, and the 6th that had drifted loose in the Vale. He counted them, and their number steadied him because the arithmetic of his soul had never once failed him, and it did not fail him now. And yet, he found walking his vault that he could not stop returning to a single question, and the question had claws. Bellatrix had said the dead thing showed her his death, not threatened it, showed it. And Bellatrix, whatever her other faults, did not break. He had watched her endure the loss of everything a human being can lose and come out the other side laughing. Something had reached into the most devoted mind he owned and simply switched off the light, and it had done so by every account, without a wand, without a word, with a touch. He would need to move the anchors. That was the cold conclusion, and it galled him, because moving them was an admission, and Lord Voldemort did not make admissions. But he would move them quietly, and he would set new guards, and in the meantime he would do the thing he had always done best, the thing that had never failed to bring an enemy to heel. He would find what the creature loved, and he would take it, because everything that walks in the world of the living loves something, and love is the loose brick in every fortress, and he had spent a lifetime learning exactly where to push. It wore Potter's face, he murmured, to the empty hall. Then it kept Potter's heart. And a heart can be reached. And in a house in London that no eye could find, the master of death felt the great cold engine turn toward him across the miles and set down the day's work in the place the office made for such things and permitted himself in the dark the nearest thing he still had to a smile. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The court of fear. Lucius Malfoy had led the ambush at the ministry. Harry had not forgotten it, though he had promised himself he would not touch a man for the past. Lucius had stood in the Hall of Prophecy in his silver mask and offered a 15-year-old the chance to hand over the glass sphere quietly, and when the 15-year-old refused, Lucius had given the order that turned the shelves into a killing ground, and it was Lucius's operation, Lucius's planning, Lucius's cold patrician confidence that had built the box the veil sat at the bottom of. He had not cast the curse. He had built the room the curse was cast in. On the ledger of the men who sent Harry to the Vale, Lucius Malfoy's name was written in a careful, well-bred hand, and Harry meant to visit him for the living reason, not the dead one, because Lucius Malfoy was going to go on building rooms like that until someone stopped him, and Harry was the one who had come to stop him. He walked up the long drive to Malfoy Manor in the blue hour before dawn, and the white peacocks fled shrieking from the cold, and the wrought iron gates which had turned away aurors and rival lords for 300 years unwound themselves and opened for him the way everything opened for him now. Voldemort was not in residence. Harry had made certain of that. He could feel the Dark Lord's absence the way you feel an empty chair in a familiar room, and he had timed his visit for it because he was not yet ready for that meeting and he did not intend to have it by accident on another man's ground. What was in residence was the family. Lucius and his wife and the son Draco, 17 and gray-faced, and in over his depth in a way Harry recognized too well to enjoy. Harry stood in the great cold entrance hall of Malfoy Manor with its peacock blue walls and its ancestors glaring down from their frames, and he waited, unhurried, for the master of the house to be brought to him by his own dread. Lucius came down the great staircase in his dressing gown with his wand in his hand and his silver hair loose, and he was halfway down before the cold reached him, and he stopped, one hand on the banister, and looked at the thing standing in his hall, and his aristocratic composure, the composure of 20 generations, cracked straight across. "You," he whispered. "They said, the reports from the north. I told the Dark Lord it was a tale to frighten the ranks." "It isn't a tale," Harry said. "Come down, Lucius, all the way down. I want to look at you on the level." He did not kill Lucius Malfoy, and he did not break his mind as he had broken Bellatrix's, because Bellatrix had been a furnace with nothing in it but devotion, and Lucius was a different sort of vessel. A proud man, a frightened man, a man who loved exactly two things in the world and had spent his life pretending he loved only power. Harry had learned in his short cold career that you do not spend on a man what a man can be made to spend on himself. "You entrusted your master's diary to your own vanity," Harry said. He walked a slow circle around the trembling lord in the middle of his own hall. "Years ago, he gave you a piece of his soul to keep safe, the most precious thing he owned, though you didn't know what it was, and you used it as a weapon in a petty scheme and got it destroyed by a 12-year-old with a basilisk fang. He has never forgiven you for it. You know he's never forgiven you. You've spent every day since wondering when the bill comes due." He stopped in front of Lucius. "I'm not here to collect his bill. I'm here to give you a chance to stop being the man who'll spend his son as he spent the diary." Lucius's gray eyes flickered once toward the staircase, toward the landing where Draco stood in the shadows, and that flicker was the whole of him laid bare. "He'll take Draco," Harry said quietly. "You know that. Your son's failing whatever task your master set him, and your master doesn't keep failures, he keeps examples. You've watched it coming for a year and told yourself you'd find a way, and you haven't, because there isn't one, not while you're on your knees to a man who can't be killed." He let the cold ease just slightly, a mercy calibrated to the exact size of the opening he wanted. "He can be killed, Lucius. That's the thing the North is really saying under all the ghost stories. The undieable thing is going to die, and I'm the one who's going to see to it, and when it happens, every man still kneeling to him goes down into the dark with him." Or, he held the Lord's eyes. "You take your wife and your son and you leave tonight. You go somewhere your master's arm is short and you sit out the ending, and you're alive on the other side of it to be a father instead of a warning. I don't want your death, Lucius. Dead, you're one more soul on my river. Alive and gone, you're a hole in his lines where his most useful family used to be. Choose which you'd rather be." He turned the manor into a message that night, and the message was not written in blood. He left Lucius Malfoy alive and unhurt and utterly persuaded, and by the following evening the wards of Malfoy Manor stood over an empty house, its peacocks scattered. Its master fled with his family into a silence that Voldemort's people would search for and not find, because a man running to save his child runs faster than any man running for a cause. The Dark Lord's most powerful ally had simply evaporated, and everyone who heard of it on both sides of the war understood the same thing, that the cold thing walking through England did not always need to kill you to take you off the board. Sometimes it only needed to remind you what you loved. Before he left the manor, Harry climbed the great staircase to the landing where Draco Malfoy stood pressed into the shadows, 17 and hollow-eyed and shaking, a dark mark on an arm too thin to have earned it, and he looked at the other young man for a long moment because there was a version of the last 5 years in which their places were reversed and both of them knew it. "He put a task on you that you couldn't do," Harry said. "It was not a question. Told you it was an honor. Told you your family's life depended on it, and you've been sick with it since summer, and there's no one you can say so to because saying so out loud in this house gets people killed." Draco did not answer. His gray eyes were fixed on Harry with the particular horror of someone recognizing a fear he has never let himself name. I was made into a weapon too, different hands, same shape. I'm not going to tell you it gets better because look at me. But your father's going to take you somewhere far tonight and you should go, and you should let yourself become something other than what they aimed you at because you still can and I can't, and that's the only difference between us that matters. He turned to go and paused. Don't waste it. I'd have given a great deal for the door you're about to walk through. He left him staring after him, and never learned and never needed to learn that Draco Malfoy went with his family into the silence that night without one word of argument, and spent the rest of the war being nobody's weapon at all, which was in the end the most a life aimed like that could hope to win back. Dolar's Umbridge had a house in a respectable street with a garden of the correct flowers, and a great many plates on the walls with kittens painted on them. Harry came to her on the fourth night of the reckoning, and she was the one visit he had debated with himself, because there was nothing in Umbridge that threatened a single life in the war to come. She was a small cruelty, a functionary, a woman who had made him carve the words "I must not tell lies" into the back of his own hand with a blood quill over and over in detention when he was 15 and telling the truth and no one would listen. That was the past. He had promised not to touch the past. And so he had almost let her be, and then he had remembered that Dolar's Umbridge was, at that very hour, drafting legislation for the new ministry, sitting on committees deciding which frightened people were sufficiently pure to be allowed to keep their wands, and that she would go on doing small cruelties to living people with a sweet smile and a saucer of tea until something interrupted her, and Harry found that interrupting such things was precisely his job. He did not hurt her. That was the discipline, and it was the whole of the message. He sat in the chair across from her bed and he waited for her to wake, and when she woke and saw the cold thing in her chintz armchair, she opened her mouth to scream, and he let her understand with a look that no sound she made would leave the room. Then he spoke to her very softly in the tone of a functionary reading out a docket. "I know what you are," he said. "You've built a whole life out of the belief that if you smile while you do it, it isn't cruelty. I've come to take the smile away." He leaned forward. "I'm not going to touch you, Dolars. I'm going to do something much worse. I'm going to make you honest. From tonight, every time you sign your name to cruelty, you're going to feel the exact weight of it, the whole of what it does to the person on the other end, all at once in your own body for as long as it lasts them. Every quill you push. Every wand you take, every frightened family you send down. You wanted a world where the truth couldn't reach you. I've closed the gap. Enjoy your committees." It was not a curse any examiner could have named, and it left no mark a healer could find, and Dolar's Umbridge resigned her posts within the month, pleading nerves, and was never comfortable in a room with her own signature again. Harry counted the cost of it, a thread, the memory of a specific summer light through the leaves of Privet Drive that he had somehow still been carrying, and he paid it and judged it well spent and went north to the thing he had been circling for 4 nights, because the ring in the gaunt house had been screaming to him since the moment he came back, and it was time. By the end of that first week, the whole of magical Britain had become a court of fear, and it did not know whose court it was. That was the strangeness of it. The reckoning left no manifesto, gave no speeches, flew no banner. It only moved house to house in the dark and left behind it a trail of the impossible, a fanatic who feared nothing sitting broken among her banisters, a great family vanished from a warded manor, a ministry hardwoman resigned and shaking, killing curses breaking like rain against a hooded thing that wore a dead martyr's face. The prophet did not know what to print, and so it printed contradictions, a hero returned, a demon risen, a hoax, a warning. The Order argued in its cellars over whether the thing was ally or abomination, and Dumbledore, who knew, said only that it could not be stopped and should not be crossed, and would say no more, and his silence frightened them worse than any answer. And in the safe houses of the Death Eaters, where fear had always flowed one direction, up toward the Dark Lord and never back, a new cold had begun to seep in under the doors, because their master, the Deathless One, the whole promise their allegiance was built on, had been heard to scream. Harry felt all of it, the way the office let him feel the shape of the living world, and he understood that he had, without one word of proclamation, become the thing every side was organizing itself around. The war was still Voldemort's against Dumbledore's, on the surface, in the daylight. But underneath, in the place where people decide at night what they truly believe, both armies had begun to arrange themselves around a third fact, cold and nameless and moving in the dark, and every man in Britain who lay awake now lay awake, wondering not whether his side would win, but whether the thing from the veil would come to his door, and what it would find written on his ledger when it did. That was a court of fear, and Harry was its silent sovereign, and he had not asked to be, and he found that he could use it, and he examined the finding carefully, the way death had taught him, and did not entirely like what he saw, and used it anyway because the alternative was 10 more years of daylight war, and all the arches those years would fill. The house where Voldemort's mother's people had rotted for 3 centuries stood in a tangle of nettles on a hillside above Little Hangleton, and it was the most wretched building Harry had ever seen, and inside it, under the floor, wrapped in a curse that had eaten Albus Dumbledore's hand, waited 2 things at once. A wound and a hallow sharing a ring, screaming in 2 different registers. The wound screamed the way all the wounds screamed, a torn soul's thin blasphemy against the country it was hiding from. But under it, older and deeper, the hallow rang, and its ringing was not a scream at all. It was the low, sure note the cloak on his shoulders had begun to answer the moment he crossed into the valley, two of the three recognizing each other across the miles, calling their master up the hill through the nettles and the dark toward the place where the second of them had lain waiting since a fool of a gaunt had scratched the mark of the brothers into a stone he did not understand and called it a coat of arms. The curse died as he crossed the threshold. He felt it recognize him and simply cease the way the wards had ceased, the way the manor gates had opened, because it had been made to keep men out, and he was not, any longer, precisely a man. He knelt in the filth where the floorboard was loose and he lifted it, and there in a rotten box lay the ring, a heavy gold thing set with a black stone, and the stone had a symbol scratched into its face that he knew now as he knew his own name. A triangle, a circle, a line, the mark of the three brothers, the mark of the Hallows. The Horcrux screamed at him from the metal. He dealt with it first. He took the ring up in his cold hand, and he did not need a fang or a fiend's fire or any of the crude instruments the living used to unmake a torn soul. He simply looked at the fragment of Tom Riddle huddled shrieking in the gold, and he opened, as he had opened it for Bellatrix, the gray door between the worlds, and he showed the fragment where it belonged. It fought him. It was a piece of the most frightened creature that had ever lived, and it did not want to go, and it clawed at the inside of the ring and wailed in a voice that was almost the voice of a lost child, and Harry, who had no reason on earth to pity it, found that he pitied it anyway, the scrap of a soul so terrified of ending that it had let itself be hammered into a ring and buried under a murderer's floor for 50 years, rather than face the river every other living thing faced without complaint. He did not hate it. Hating it would have been spending on the past. He simply took it gently as he had taken the terror out of the Wandmaker's crossing, and he sent it down to the arch that waited for it, and it went wailing and was gone, and the ring in his hand went quiet. One wound of the seven closed forever, and the cost of the mercy was a thread he did not even feel go. And then there was only the stone. The resurrection stone came loose from its setting into his palm, black and smooth and warm, warmer than anything had felt to his cold hand since the veil. And the moment it touched him, the second hallow folded into him the way the first had, the way the wand's allegiance had, and he felt the three of them come nearer to hole in his flesh than they had been since the country beyond, and the office in him sang a low three-note chord that shivered the nettles outside the broken window. He knew what the stone did. Every child who had heard the tale of the three brothers knew what the stone did. It called back the dead, not truly, not to life, but as shades, echoes, the beloved gone summoned into half their presence that could speak and could look at you and could not stay, and that had driven the second brother to hang himself for wanting what he could not fully have. That was the stone in a living man's hand. But Harry's hand was not a living man's hand. Harry was the keeper of the river the stone reached into. For him, the stone was not a cracked window onto the dead. For him, it was a door he held the key to, and behind the door, somewhere in the number of everyone, were a man and a woman who had died on a Halloween night to keep him alive, and he could feel exactly where they were, and he could feel exactly how much of himself it would cost to bring them not as shades, but all the way back, warm, breathing, real. He knelt in the filthy ruin of the gaunt house with the stone in his hand, and he did the arithmetic. Because he had promised death, he would always do the arithmetic honestly, and the arithmetic was this: he had enough. That was the horror of it. He had spent threads all week, and he still had enough, if he spent nearly all the rest, to buy back one of them, one, not both. And whichever he chose would come up out of the river into a body remade from his own dwindling warmth, and would walk in the sun again, and would have a son who was cold as the grave and mad with the wanting, and had perhaps 6 months of himself left before the office burned out the last of the Harry in him and left only the keeper. He could give his mother back to the world and lose himself in the giving, and she would spend the rest of her second life watching the thing that wore her son's face go out like a candle. He turned the stone over in his palm. Once. They came not as he could have dragged them, but as the stone gave them, freely and gently and at no cost at all. Two shades, standing in the ruin of the gaunt house in the gray before dawn, more solid than ghosts and less solid than memory, and they looked at him, and they were not afraid of the cold, because they were past all cold now, and his mother's eyes were his own eyes, and his father's untidy hair stood up at the back exactly as his did, and neither of them said at first anything at all. "I wasn't going to call you," Harry said. His voice was not steady, and here in this one place with no one to see he let it not be. "I told myself I wouldn't. It counts as spending on the past. I've a whole speech about it, and then I had the stone in my hand and he stopped. "You wanted to see us," his mother said. Her voice was the sound the stone made of a voice near and far at once, and it went through the cold of him and found something the office had not managed to quiet. "Of course you did. Oh, Harry, look at you, look what they made you carry." "I can bring one of you back," he said. It came out of him fast, the terrible, honest offer, before the discipline could close over it. "All the way, not like this, real. I've got enough. I worked it out. I can put one of you back in the world, breathing, and you could have the life he took, you could." "No," said James Potter quietly, and there was no anger in it, only the flat, sure love of a father heading off his child at the edge of a cliff. "No, son, you can't, not because you haven't the power, because of what you'd have to burn to do it, and because we're the two people in all the world with the least right to let you burn it." He came a half step nearer, as near as the stone would let him. "We died so you could live. Do you understand what you're asking? You're asking to undo the one thing our whole lives came to mean, so you can have us back and then go out like a snuffed wick in front of us. That's not a gift to us, Harry. That's the cruelest thing you could do to two people who love you. Leaving us in the river is the last thing we get to do for you. Let us do it." Harry knelt in the dirt a long time. His mother crouched down in front of him, insubstantial, radiant, and though the stone would not let her touch him, she put her not quite hand where his cheek was, and the cold of him did not reach her, and the warmth of her did not reach him, and they stayed like that, a mother and a son with a river between them, in the ruin of the house where the man who killed them had been made. "You're doing it right," she said. "The thing you're afraid you're getting wrong, you came back for the living. You're spending yourself on them and not on us. That's the whole of it, love. That's the only test there ever was, and you're passing it, and it's breaking you to pass it, and that's how I know you're still mine." Her not quite eyes searched his face. "There's a man keeping you tethered, black hair, gray eyes, laughs too loud. We saw him find you that night at the Vale. We were close by. Keep hold of him. And there's a girl who sees you clear coming soon. Let her. Don't do this alone, Harry. The office will tell you to do it alone because it's easier for the office. Don't. I don't know how much of me is going to be left," Harry said. "At the end, if I do the whole job, there's the snake and the cup and the rest of the six, and then there's the one in my own head, and I don't know how to take that one out without—" He did not finish it. "Then find out," said his father. "You've a habit of finding out the impossible ones just in time. It's the most infuriating thing about you. Hid it from your mother." The shade of James Potter almost smiled, and the almost was a gift across the whole width of death. "We have to go, Harry. The stone won't hold us, and it shouldn't. We're not meant to stand about in the world giving advice. That's what living parents are for, and we didn't get to be them, and I'm sorrier about that than about the dying. Put the stone away. Don't turn it for us again. We're all right. We were always all right from the moment it worked and you lived. Go and then this is the part I need you to hear. Then let yourself be finished too someday when the work's done. Come down the river like everything else. Don't stay cold forever out of pride. Promise me you'll let yourself come home in the end." "I promise," Harry said. And they went the way the stone gives them back, not torn away but simply thinning, like breath on a window fading as the glass warms, and the last of them was his mother's eyes, which were his eyes, holding his until there was nothing left to hold. And then Harry Potter was alone in the ruin of the gaunt house with the resurrection stone cooling in his palm and one more wound of the seven closed, and the whole grey weight of what he had refused sitting in him like a swallowed stone of his own. Far off at the seat of an office that was no longer empty, the oldest thing in existence marked what had happened in the ruin on the hill and did not speak, because it did not need to. The marking passed down the length of the border between the worlds and reached Harry where he knelt, a pressure without words, the nearest thing death had to approval. He had held the stone that had driven the second brother to the noose. He had held it as its true master, with the power to do the thing no living hand could do, to reach past the shade to the soul and drag it whole into the sun. And he had turned it once for the gift it freely gave, and taken the comfort of two faces and the counsel of two voices, and then he had put it away without spending a single thread on the past, and that was the maze walk to its end. That was the thing 700 years of men with three trinkets had failed to do, and the country of the dead knew it and was, in its granite fashion, satisfied. The refusal had cost him too. That was the part the tales never told, the part not even death had warned him of plainly. That turning away from the river when you have the power to command it is its own kind of spending, that grief refused does not vanish but settles, and that he would carry the weight of the two he had not brought back for as long as he carried the office, heavier by the day, a debt paid not in warmth but in the slow accumulating ache of the right thing done. He knelt with it a while longer and let it be heavy, because a man who could no longer feel the weight of that particular refusal would be a man with nothing left worth calling Harry. Then he rose. He closed his hand around the hallow. He did not turn it again. He rose and went out into the dawn, north to south, the length of England folding away under him, back toward London and the house where the locket waited and the old elf who had guarded it for love. Creature wept when Harry gave him the locket. Not at first. At first the old house elf only stared at it, lying in Harry's cold palm, the heavy golden locket of Salazar Slytherin with its serpentine S, the thing Regulus Black had died to steal and could not destroy, the thing Creature had been ordered to destroy and could not, and had hidden and had guarded and had failed at for years in an agony of thwarted duty that had helped turn him into the bitter creature the Order despised. "Master Regulus," Creature croaked. Master Regulus told Creature to destroy it. Creature tried for years. Creature could not. Creature is a bad elf, a bad. You're not, Harry said. It couldn't be destroyed by any magic you had. It couldn't be destroyed by any magic Dumbledore had, or he'd have done it. It was waiting for me. And you kept it safe until I came, exactly as Regulus asked, which means you didn't fail him, Creature. You just had to wait a very long time to succeed. He held the elf's great pale eyes. "Watch, this is the ending of Regulus's story. He should have had it himself. I'll give it to you instead, and you can tell it to him when you see him, and you will see him one day on a bank I keep, and he'll be proud of you." He opened the door between the worlds, and he took the fragment of Tom Riddle out of the locket as he had taken the one out of the ring, gently, without hatred, sending it down to its arch, and the locket in his palm cracked open and went cold and dead and ordinary. One more wound closed, and Creature made a sound that no one in that house had heard a black elf make in 100 years, a high thin keening of grief and release together. And knelt on the kitchen floor and wept for a young master 15 years dead who had, at the very last, been vindicated. Harry set the dead locket in the old elf's hands and let him keep it, and did not say anything else, because there are moments the office has no business speaking into, and this was one, and even the keeper of the last door knew enough to be quiet in the face of a servant's love finally paid its due. Sirius brought Luna Lovegood to Grimmauld Place the next evening, because he had watched Harry Frey for a week and had remembered, out of the wreck of the summer, that there had been exactly one person who spoke to Harry sanely about the dead when everyone else went silent and awkward, And that person was a fourth year with radish earrings who could see the Strauss and had lost her own mother young and was not, in any register anyone could measure, afraid of endings. She came into the cold drawing room without the flinch that everyone else brought, and she looked at Harry and she saw him. That was the thing. Sirius saw a beloved godson gone strange and cold and frightening and loved him through the fear. Dumbledore had seen a weapon awake, the Death Eaters saw the thing in the dark. Luna Lovegood looked at the Master of Death across a dim room in a morning house and simply saw Harry Potter changed, carrying something enormous, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, and she tilted her head with her pale protuberant eyes gone soft, and the first thing she said was, "Not your dead or your back or what are you?" "Oh," she said, "you've been all the way there to where they go." She set down the string bag she carried. "I wondered who kept it. My mother always said someone must, or it would all pile up. I didn't think it would be you, but it makes a sort of sense that it's someone who'd know to be gentle with them." "Luna," Harry said, and something in his cold chest moved that had not moved for anyone else, not Sirius, not his parents' shades. Because Sirius loved him and his parents grieved him, but Luna alone of all of them was not afraid, and the office in him could not lean toward her the way it leaned toward the warm, because there was nothing in her for it to feed on. She had made her peace with death years ago on a spring morning when hers came for her mother, and a girl at peace with the border gives its keeper nothing to hunger after and everything to rest against. "You're not frightened of me?" "No," Luna agreed, sitting down across from him and folding her hands. "Should I be? You take the dead across the water and you're kind to them when they're scared. That's a good thing to be. It's a very lonely thing to be, I expect, because everyone alive is frightened of you and everyone dead has somewhere else to be, so you're rather stuck in the middle with no one to talk to, but it isn't frightening." She considered him. "You're spending yourself, though, I can see it. You're going all thin at the edges like a photograph left in the sun. Your mother would tell you to stop if she could." "She did," Harry said, "last night in so many words." "Then you've seen her." Luna smiled, and it was the strangest and most healing thing that had happened to him since the veil, because there was no fear in it and no grief in it, only a plain glad interest, as though he had told her he had visited a foreign country she had always wanted to hear about. "I'm glad. Was she well? People are mostly on the other side." "Mum was," she waved. She reached out, and where Sirius had braced himself to hold Harry's cold hand and Dumbledore had not dared touch it at all, Luna simply took it, the way you take anyone's hand, and did not flinch and did not let the cold mean anything, because to Luna Lovegood the cold was only weather. "I'll come and sit with you when you're doing the hard parts. You shouldn't do the hard parts with only frightened people to come home to. It makes you think being frightening is all you're for." "I'm not frightened, so I'll be the one you come home to, and I'll tell you when you've gone too thin and you'll believe me because I've no reason to lie about it." All right," Harry said. It came out of him rough. She was the second thread the office could not fray, and he had not known, until she took his hand, how much he had needed a second. Voldemort came for his mind that night, and it was the worst mistake he had made in 70 years. Harry felt it begin as he had felt it begin so many times in the last dreadful year of his life. The pressure behind the scar, the cold intrusion, the sense of another presence pushing at the door of his skull. Once it had terrified him. Once it had walked him to a veil. Voldemort had spent a year learning that the connection between them ran both ways and could be used as a leash, and he reached down it now in fury and in fear, meaning to find what the creature loved and where the creature slept and how the creature might be reached, meaning to do to the thing wearing Potter's face exactly what he had done to Potter. He had forgotten which of them owned the door now. Harry did not resist the intrusion. He welcomed it. He opened the connection wide, wider than Voldemort had ever managed to force it, and he reached back up the leash and took hold of the hand that held it, and he pulled, and Lord Voldemort, at the head of his long table in a house far to the north, was yanked out of his own mind and down the burning thread of the scar into the presence of the Master of Death. He showed him nothing false. That was the cruelty of it, the same cruelty he had shown Bellatrix. He showed him the truth. He showed him the country beyond, the arches, the river, the number of everyone. He showed him the 6 closed wounds, one after another, the diary and the ring and the locket already dark, and the cup and the diadem and the snake still singing, but found, all found, every hiding place he had bled himself white to make, known to the cold thing that held him now. And he showed him the arch that waited, the one with Voldemort's own name on it in a script older than language, and behind the arch the shrieking figure Bellatrix had gone mad seeing, the Dark Lord dragged down the current stripped of all 7 anchors, finished, unmade, ordinary, dead. And then Harry spoke to him mind to mind for the first time since the veil in the flat, quiet voice that did not rise. "You made yourself 7 wounds so you'd never feel this," he said. "And you put one of them in me by accident, the night you tried to murder a baby, and it's the wound that's going to kill you because it made a door between us, and you spent a year using the door, and you taught me every trick of it, and now the door belongs to me. I'm going to close the other 5, and then I'm going to deal with the one in my own head, and then you're going to stand in front of me with nothing between you and the river but your own bare terror, and I'm going to give you exactly what you spent your whole life running from, not out of hate. I don't hate you, I pity you, which is worse, and you'll understand how much worse before the end. There's nowhere left to hide, Tom. You cut yourself into 7 pieces to get away from me, and all you did was make sure I'd know you by heart. He let him go, and in the letting go he made the one error of his cold and careful campaign, because a door that has been opened wide enough to pull a man through is a door that leaks in both directions, and in the instant before Harry closed it, Lord Voldemort caught from the far side a single flash of what the thing wearing Potter's face was guarding. Not much. A grimed kitchen in a house he could not place, a gray-eyed man laughing too loud over a bottle of wine, a pale girl with strange earrings taking a cold hand without fear, warmth held close and defended the one soft place in an armor of frost. Voldemort had it for less than a heartbeat before the door slammed, and it was enough, because Lord Voldemort had spent 70 years learning exactly one lesson about the people who opposed him, and the lesson was that they all loved something, and that love was the loose brick, and that he had never once failed to find it. He did not yet know the names. He would learn the names. And when he had them, he would do the thing that had broken every hero before this one. He would make the cold thing choose between its work and its warmth, between the war and the few threads it had come back to keep, and he would watch it spend itself to save them, or watch it let them die to save the world, and either way at last he would have found the bottom of it. Lord Voldemort came back into his own body at the head of his table with a cry he could not swallow in time, in front of his servants, the first weakness they had ever seen in him, and the cry was not rage. Every man at that table heard it, and none of them ever spoke of it, and all of them from that night began quietly to make their own arrangements for the end, because the Dark Lord had screamed, and there is only one thing in the world that makes a deathless man scream, and it had learned his name, and it was coming. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The Unmaking the Cup of Helga Hufflepuff sat in a vault a half-mile under London, behind goblin gold and goblin law and a dragon that had been chained in the dark so long it had gone white and blind, and Harry walked down to it through the earth the way the dead walk, without stairs. He did not break into Gringotts. Breaking in was a thing thieves did, and thieves left signs and were caught and had their names put in the paper. Harry simply went where the wrong notes sang, downward through stone and clay and the deep cold rivers that run under every old city, and the wards of the goblins, which had held against every mortal robber for 1,000 years, were mortal wards, and he was not, and they parted before the keeper of the last door and closed behind him and never knew he had passed. The descent was a thing no living man could have made and lived to describe. He went down past the reach of roots, past the drowned Roman streets and the older streets beneath them, past the bones the city had been laid on and the bones beneath those, down through the strait of everyone London had ever buried, and the dead of the deep earth stirred as he passed, not risen, not summoned, only turning in their long sleep to feel their keeper go by overhead, the way a whole graveyard will seem to lean on certain nights toward a single mourner. He walked through solid rock as through a curtain. He walked through the cold rivers that no map records, that run black and blind beneath every ancient city, and the things that lived in them fled his cold, and he did not disturb the water, because he was not in any sense the water understood there. He came into the deepest vaults from below, out of the living rock, into a dark that no lamp had ever touched, and the first thing he met was the dragon. It lifted its blind white head as he came, and it did not roar. It had been beaten with clashing metal until it feared the sound of its own strength. It had been starved pale and chained lame in the dark under the world, a creature made for the high cold winds kept 50 years in a hole, and it was, Harry saw with the eyes the office had given him, very near its end. Its great heart was failing. It had perhaps a season left of the ruin men had made of its life, and it knew the way animals know that the cold thing standing in its dark was the one that came at the end for everything. He put his hand on its blind white brow, and it did not flinch. Not yet, he told it as he had told his own scar, but gently, without the menace. But soon, and when it comes, I'll make it kind, and I'll open the door onto a sky, and you'll have the wind again on the other side of it. I promise you that. Hold on a little longer. There's one more thing in this dark that needs ending first, and then I'll come back for you myself. The dragon lowered its head, and something in the tortured animal eased, because even a beast can tell the difference between the hand that chains and the hand that frees, and Harry left it quiet in the dark and went on to the Lestrange vault, where the cup sang its thin, wrong song among 100 years of stolen treasure. The vault was cursed against thieves. Everything in it burned and multiplied at a touch, a drowning tide of red-hot gold made to bury any hand that reached where it should not. Harry reached in and took the cup, and nothing burned him and nothing multiplied, because the curses were made to punish greed, and there was no greed in him. There was only the office, and the office does not steal, it collects. He held Helga Hufflepuff's little golden cup in his cold palm, and he opened the gray door, and he took the shrieking fragment of Tom Riddle out of it and sent it down as he had sent the others, gently, without hate, and the cup went cold and quiet. One more wound of the 7 closed, 4 of the 6 external anchors dark now, and the cost of it was a thread he chose not to look at too closely as it grayed and went. Then he kept his word. He went back through the dark to the blind white dragon, and he opened a door in the rock onto the cold night sky over the Scottish sea, far from any eye, and he laid his hand on the failing heart and stopped its pain, and the great creature went out of its chains and its darkness and up through the door he held into a wind it had not felt in 50 years, and its ending was kind, and it cost him a thread, and it was not part of any war or any plan, and he did it anyway. Because he was the keeper of a border, and the dragon had come to it, and death had told him he did not only gain a power, he inherited a country and everyone who crossed it. He stood a moment in the rock under the sea with the door still open on the stars, and then he closed it and turned north because the diadem was singing to him now from the one place in Britain he had been avoiding since he came back, and there was no avoiding it any longer. The last two wounds were at Hogwarts, and one of them was in his own head, and it was time to go home. He came to the castle at dusk, and the castle knew him before the gates did. That was the thing about Hogwarts that no history recorded. It was old, older than the Ministry, old as the veil beneath it, 1,000 years of the living and the dying layered stone on stone, and it had its own dim, vast awareness. And when the Master of Death walked up the long slope from Hogsmeade in the failing light, the whole castle felt him coming the way a sleeper feels a change in the weather. The torches in the windows guttered. The ghosts who had drifted its corridors for centuries in their homesick half-life all turned at once toward the gates and drew near and did not flee, because the ghosts of Hogwarts were the long-lingering dead, and here at last was the one who could tell them whether it was time. The Bloody Baron came. Nearly headless Nick came, and the Grey Lady, Ravenclaw's daughter, who had a thing to tell him that she had told no one in 500 years, drifted down out of a high tower with her secret ready on her cold lips. Dumbledore met him at the gates. The old man had felt him coming too and had come down alone, without the order, without the staff, leaning on his cane with the elder wand loose in his blackened hand, and he looked at Harry across the wrought iron with the blue eyes, very tired and very clear. "You've come for the diadem," Dumbledore said. "Ravenclaw's lost diadem. It's in the castle, isn't it? All these years in my castle." "In a room that only appears when it's needed," Harry said. "The room where things are hidden. It's been there since he hid it, the year he came back begging you for a teaching post and you turned him away. He walked past 1,000 students with a piece of his soul in his pocket and tucked it into your walls, and it's been screaming there ever since, and you never heard it because you were listening for clever things." He looked up at the castle, at the golden windows, at the ghosts gathering at the gates. "I'm going to take it out of your walls, Professor, and then there's only the snake and the one in my head, and this ends. But I need you to understand what's about to happen, because it isn't going to happen quietly, and your students are in that castle. Tell me." "He knows I'm here." Harry's voice was flat and certain. "He's felt every wound close. He's been moving his anchors and finding me already at each one, and now there are two left and they're both under your roof, and he knows I have to come here to finish it, and so this is where he'll make his stand, because he has nothing left to lose but the last of himself, and a cornered thing that can't die is the most dangerous thing there is." The ghosts pressed closer at the gates, cold and attentive. "He's coming to Hogwarts, Albus. Tonight or tomorrow, with everything he has left, because it's the only move on the board that might still work. Make me choose between finishing him and saving the people in this castle. He's going to fill this ground with dying so that I have to spend myself holding the door, and while I'm spending, he thinks he'll find a way to run. Get them out, the young ones. Get as many out as you can, because the ones who stay are going to see things tonight that no child should see, and some of them are going to come to my river before morning, and I would rather they didn't." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, an old general reading a map he had not drawn. "They will not all go," he said. "The older ones, they have been fighting a war for a year. They will not leave the castle to fight it without them. You know this, you were one of them." "I know," Harry said. "Then arm them and warn them and tell them the truth for once, which is that the thing in the dark tonight is on their side, whatever it looks like. And open the gates, Professor, let me in. It's time I came home for the last of it." The gates of Hogwarts opened, and the Master of Death walked back into the school that had made him, and the ghosts of 1,000 years fell in behind him like an honor guard of the drowned. He went up through the grounds in the last of the light, and the castle received him the way an old house receives a child come home changed from a war. The greenhouses, the lake black and enormous, with the giant squid stirring uneasily in its depths at the cold passing overhead. The long walk up to the oak front doors he had come through as an 11-year-old in a boat, terrified and hopeful and warm, 6 years and 1 death ago. Word ran ahead of him through the corridors, because word always ran ahead of him now, and by the time he reached the entrance hall, the students had gathered on the great marble staircase, hundreds of them, silent, staring, and Harry stopped at the foot of the stairs and looked up at the masked, frightened faces of the school he had once belonged to, and understood that not one of them saw a schoolmate. They saw the cold. They saw the thing from the veil. Some of them had known him. Some of them had cheered his name at Quidditch and copied his defense notes and left flowers on a wall in the summer under the word martyr. And none of them, looking at him now, could find the person that shrine had been built for, because that person had spent himself away thread by thread, and what stood at the foot of their staircase was the office wearing what was left. Professor McGonagall came through the crowd, white to the lips, and stopped 3 steps up and looked at him with her wand in her hand and her chin high, an old teacher facing a thing she had no lesson for. "Potter," she said, and her voice only shook once. "They told me you were dead." "I was," Harry said. "It didn't take. Get them out, Professor. The young ones, the ones under 16, get them through the tunnels to Hogsmeade and out tonight as fast as you can, because in a few hours this castle is going to be the worst place in Britain, and I would rather not spend myself scraping first years off my river before dawn." He looked past her at the frightened faces. "The rest of you who mean to stay and fight, I won't stop you and I won't lie to you. Tonight there'll be a cold in this castle that isn't the enemy's, and a host of the dead that isn't the enemy's either, and a thing on the front steps that used to sit where you're sitting. Don't run from the cold. The cold is the only thing standing between you and what's actually coming. That's all the comfort I've got. Take it or leave it, and either way, get the children out. And Minerva McGonagall, who had taught him transfiguration and caught him on a broomstick and believed him dead these 4 months, looked into the ruined green eyes of the thing her student had become and did the only thing left to a good teacher at the end of the world. She turned and began briskly in a voice that carried and steadied to save the children. The diadem came out of the room of requirement without ceremony. The diadem came out of the room of requirement without ceremony. He walked through the mountain of hidden things, the centuries of contraband and shame and forgotten treasure, to the bust where a dead schoolboy had once hung a stolen crown, and he took the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw in his cold hand, and the fragment inside it howled, the last of the external six, and he opened the door and sent it down, and the diadem went quiet, and something that had been a girl 500 years ago drifted through the wall behind him and spoke. He never knew what he'd hidden it in, said the Grey Lady. My mother's diadem, I stole it in life, I took it out of spite and pride and grief, and I hid it and I died before I could give it back, and I have carried the shame of it for 500 years, drifting these halls, unable to tell the tale to anyone who could set it right. Her cold eyes were on him. You've taken his poison out of it, will you take it home? Harry looked at Helena Ravenclaw, who had lingered 5 centuries on the near bank because she could not finish a story that shamed her. Your mother's on the far shore, she's not angry, the dead so rarely are, anger is a thing you put down at the river, she's been waiting for you a long time and she'd rather have you than the crown. He held out his cold hand. You don't have to carry it anymore, not the shame and not the drifting. Take my hand and I'll walk you across myself, and you can give her the diadem when you see her, because I'll send it after you, and the story ends the way it should have 500 years ago. The Grey Lady of Ravenclaw, who had refused every comfort for 5 centuries, put her cold hand in his, and Harry walked her the little terrible distance to the river and eased her across, and it cost him a thread and he did not begrudge it, and one more homesick soul went up out of the long dark toward a shore where her mother was waiting, and the corridors of Hogwarts were a little emptier of grief than they had been for 500 years. For a little while then there was quiet, the last quiet of that long night, and Harry spent it on the ramparts looking out over the dark grounds toward the mountains, feeling the storm gather itself beyond them. 5 of the 6 external wounds were closed, only the snake remained, warm and coiled somewhere at its master's side, and the one in his own head humming its cornered hum. 2 wounds left in all the world, and the whole cold campaign had come down to the few miles of night between the castle and the thing crossing them, and Harry stood in the wind and did the arithmetic of himself and did not like the answer. He had spent a great deal in a fortnight in a war. He was thinner than he had been. He could feel the floor of himself now, the bottom of the account, closer than it had ever been, and he understood that whatever happened on these grounds tonight, he would come out the far side of it with very little of the warmth he had carried back through the veil, and that the little he had left he would have to guard like the last coal in a dying grate. Behind him in the lit castle, Sirius was checking the defenses with Lupin, and Luna was gathering the frightened first-years, and the 2 threads the office could not fray were both, for the moment, safe and warm and where he could feel them. He held that fact against the coming dark and found it was the thing worth all the spending, and turned his old eyes back to the mountains and waited. He had barely turned from the ramparts when the sky over the castle turned green. Voldemort came at midnight with everything he had left, exactly as Harry had said he would. He came with the last of his faithful, the ones too far gone to run, and with the creatures he had gathered in the long dark year, the Dementors in their hundreds sweeping cold over the lake, the giants come down out of the north, the Inferi, the werewolves, the whole grinding apparatus of a man who had spent 70 years making the world afraid. The dark mark burned green in the sky over the astronomy tower, vast and slow, a skull with a serpent tongue drawn in cold fire across the stars, and beneath it the enemy came on in a wave that would have broken a lesser place in an hour. The lake froze at its edges as the Dementors passed over it in their hundreds, and the water beneath went black with the cold of them, and the giants waded ashore roaring with uprooted trees for clubs, and the ground shook under the tread of them, and the Inferi rose dripping out of the shallows where Voldemort had seated them, the drowned dead marching stiff and pale up the lawns with the lake water running out of their open mouths. Behind the monsters came the men, the last faithful of the Dark Lord, the ones too deep in blood to hope for any ending but his, and behind them, unhurried, borne up on nothing, wandless, his face a white mask of hate stretched thin over 70 years of terror held at bay, came Lord Voldemort himself, to a battle he had told himself was a hunt and had begun in the deepest cold cellar of his ruined soul to suspect was a funeral. And Hogwarts, which had stood 1,000 years, raised its ancient defenses and filled its courtyards with the defenders who would not leave, the Order and the teachers and the 6th and 7th years who had refused the carriages, and the battle for the castle began. Harry stood on the front steps as it broke over them, and he did the thing he had come to Hogwarts able to do, the thing no keeper of the border had done in 700 years, and it was terrible and it was beautiful, and those who lived to be old would speak of it in whispers for the rest of their lives. He called the dead not to fight. The dead do not fight, they are past all fighting, and it would have been a blasphemy to drag them back to it. He called them to stand. He reached across the border he kept, and he opened over the grounds of Hogwarts not 1 arch but 100, and out of them came the risen of 1,000 years, the dead of the castle and the valley and the long history of the place, and they stood in ranks of pale light between the living children and the things that had come to kill them, and they were not weapons and they struck no blows, but a Dementor cannot feed on a soul that has already crossed. And a giant's club passes through a shade and finds only cold, and an Inferius will not walk toward the true dead because the true dead are going where the Inferius has been forbidden to go. Harry raised a wall of the peaceful dead around the castle of the living, and the Dark Lord's army broke against it like a black tide against a white cliff, and the children of Hogwarts, who had braced to die, found themselves defended by a silent shining host that asked nothing of them but to live. The defenders of Hogwarts fought in the shelter of the shining host, and did not understand it and did not need to. Minerva McGonagall stood on the ramparts in her nightgown and tartan dressing gown with her wand a whip of white fire, sending the stone gargoyles in the suits of armor down into the courtyards to stand between the students and the giants. And when a wall of pale light rose beside her defenders she took it, the way a general takes a reinforcement she did not order and does not question, and turned it to account. Remus Lupin fought at the gates with the wolf near the surface of him and his face a mask of grief and purpose, and where his curses failed a shade would drift into the gap, and the Death Eater beyond would falter staring at a face out of his own past come to watch him work. The Weasleys were there, the whole red-headed clan of them, and Kingsley and the tattered remnant of the Order and the 6th and 7th years who had refused the carriages, fighting for the only home some of them had ever really had. And Luna Lovegood walked through the middle of it without fear. That was the thing Harry saw, even nailed as he was to the border with his arms wide and the 100 doors open, the one warm point in all the churn that the office could not stop watching. Luna moving through the battle as she moved through everything, unhurried, luminous, entirely unafraid, because she had made her peace with death on a spring morning years ago, and the battle held nothing that could touch a girl already at peace with the worst of it. She knelt by the fallen, and she was not afraid of them. She stood in the path of a Dementor, and it swept over her and away, finding nothing to feed on, because there was no despair in her for it to drink. She found the frightened first-years who had not made the carriages in time, and she gathered them into the lee of a shining ancestor, and told them in her dreamy carrying voice that the pale people were friends, that the cold boy on the steps was a friend, that it was all going to be perfectly all right, and the children believed her because Luna Lovegood had never in her life said a comforting thing she did not mean. The Dementors came in their hundreds off the lake, and Harry unmade them. That was a thing he could do that no living wizard could, no Patronus, no shield. Dementor was a wound in the world, a thing that fed on the warm by half killing them, a scavenger of the border he kept, and Harry reached out across the battlefield and simply closed them one after another as he closed the Horcruxes, sending the wretched half-lives of them down to the arches where they should have gone an age ago, and where a Patronus would have driven one off he ended 100, and the cold that was not his cold lifted off the lake, and the children could breathe. The giants he did not kill. He turned them, he opened before each lumbering mountain of muscle a glimpse of the country beyond, the same true and terrible sight he had shown Bellatrix. And a giant that has looked once into the river does not want to make more of the dead. They turned, bellowing, confused, and lumbered back into the dark they had come from, and the north emptied of them by morning. The Inferi were the cruelest thing on the field and the easiest for him. They were the dead made to walk against their nature, the drowned corpses of Voldemort's old victims puppeted up out of the lake to fight. The exact blasphemy the office existed to forbid, dead things kept from the river and driven back into the wars of the living. Harry looked at the shambling pale ranks of them coming up the lawns, and he did not burn them the way a wizard would have, with fire, screaming. He simply gave them what had been stolen from them. He opened the doors, and he let the poor drowned dead go, all at once, the whole marching army of them released from the strings that held them and sent gently down the current they had been dragged out of. And where an instant before there had been a horde of walking corpses, there was only suddenly a lawn strewn with the still and finally peaceful bodies of people who had been allowed at last to be dead. It cost him. Everything costed him now. But of all the threads he spent that night, the ones he spent unmaking Voldemort's puppets he spent most gladly, because that was the office at its purest, the door swinging true, the dead going home. And it cost him. God, it cost him. Every arch he held open, every soul he called to stand, every Dementor he unmade, and every killing curse he turned aside across that whole wide screaming battlefield, all of it paid out of him at once, threads by the dozen, by the 100, the taste of every good thing he had ever known graying and going as he stood on the steps with his arms wide and the dead at his back, spending the last of his warmth to keep a border no one else could see. He spent the first snow he ever saw. He spent the weight of a broomstick surging under him and the particular roar of a house cheering his name. He spent Christmas in the Gryffindor common room and the smell of Mrs. Weasley's kitchen and the exact color of Ginny Weasley's hair in the sun, and each one grayed and went, and he let them go one after another, the whole warm horde of a life, because every thread he spent was a curse turned and a child kept breathing, and that was the trade he had come back to make. He felt himself thinning. He felt the Harry in him guttering like a candle in a gale, and he held on because on the far side of the battlefield, in the eye of the storm he had raised, Lord Voldemort was watching him spend, and waiting, exactly as he had planned, for the cold thing to burn itself hollow. They found the snake in the thick of it, and it was Sirius who died getting to it. Nagini came through the battle like a river of muscle, vast and swift, warm and wrong, the last of the 6 anchors and the most defended, coiled always near her master, and Harry could not reach her himself because Harry was the wall, Harry was the 100 open doors. Harry could not take his will off the border for the half-second it would take to cross the field without the whole shining host collapsing and the black tide pouring in over the children. He was pinned by his own mercy. And Voldemort knew it and kept the snake at his side, safe behind the fighting, because as long as Nagini lived, the Dark Lord had 1 anchor left and could not be finished, and as long as Harry held the wall, he could not come and take it. So Sirius went. He had been fighting near the steps, close to his godson, as he had sworn to stay close, and he saw the trap of it before anyone else did, because he had spent his life reading rooms, and this was only the largest and most terrible room he had ever been asked to read. He saw that Harry was nailed to the border, that the wall of the shining dead depended on his godson standing on those steps with his arms wide and his whole will bent on the 100 open doors, that the snake would live as long as the wall stood and the wall would fall the instant Harry took his mind off it to cross the field. He saw in short that the one thing needed was the one thing Harry could not do, and that it was therefore a thing someone else would have to do for him. Sirius Black had spent 12 years in Azkaban for a crime he did not commit, and 4 months grieving an empty coffin and 1 strange cold month with his godson returned from the dead, and he had told that godson at a kitchen table at 3 in the morning that somebody who loved him should stand close enough to pull him back. He had meant it as a rope. He understood now that a rope has 2 ends, and that sometimes the only way to pull someone back from the edge is to take their place at it. He did the thing he had always done, the thing that had defined him from the day he offered himself as secret keeper, and then gave the office to a friend to draw the danger off his best mate's family. He threw himself into the gap. He caught up a fallen blade, a goblin silver thing dropped by a dead Death Eater, and he went for the snake across the whole width of the battle, and he was laughing, because Sirius Black had always laughed going toward the worst of it, gloriously, recklessly, the last of the marauders running full tilt at the end of everything with a borrowed sword and his black hair streaming. And he drew every curse in the courtyard toward himself and away from the children and away from Harry. A great reckless beacon of a man making of his own body the thing the whole battle turned to watch. He reached Nagini in the shadow of the broken fountain where she coiled at her master's feet, and the great snake struck at him and he took the strike on his arm and did not stop, and he drove the silver blade down two-handed through the flat of that vast wrong skull and into the stone beneath, and the last of Voldemort's external anchors died shrieking under his hand, and the war was all but won. And Dolohov's curse, or Rookwood's, or one of a dozen that had turned toward the laughing man with the sword, found him as he did it. Harry felt Sirius die as he felt everything die now, from the inside the specific sick lurch of a soul coming untimely to his border, and this one was not a stranger's, this one was the gray-eyed man who laughed too loud, the one thread the office could not fray, the rope he had begged not to be let go of, and it was cut out there in the dark by the very war Harry had come home to end. The wall of the dead did not fall. That was the discipline, the last terrible discipline, and it was the hardest thing he had done since he refused his mother at the Vale. Harry held the border even as Sirius died on the far side of it, held the 100 doors open and the shining host in its ranks and the children safe behind it, and did not let go, did not run to him, did not collapse the whole defense to reach one falling man, because collapsing it would have killed 100 children to reach one, and Sirius himself had died precisely to buy the moment Harry was now refusing to spend badly. But he could feel him in the current, close. Just come to the river, still trailing the warmth of his life, not yet gone up, turning in the dark near the near bank with his gray eyes finding his godson across the border the way they had found him across a kitchen. And Harry stood on the steps of Hogwarts with the battle won and the snake dead and only 2 wounds left in all the world, the one in his own head and the man he had come to close it on, and Sirius Black newly arrived on the bank of the country he kept, close enough to touch. Close enough to keep, and everything death had warned him of came due at once. Luna found him there. She came up out of the thinning battle to the front steps, through the ranks of the shining dead who parted for her because even the dead are gentle with the unafraid, and she stood beside the cold thing on the steps that could not move, and she saw at once as she saw everything what had happened because she could feel the shape of Harry's held stillness and she knew grief when it stood next to her without a single word being said. "He's on your river," she said quietly. It was not a question. The loud gray man. "He went for the snake, didn't he? And you can't go to him because if you move the wall comes down and the children die." She slipped her small cold-warmed hand into his, into the cold that had stopped being weather even to her, and held it and did not flinch and did not let go. "You're doing it right, Harry, the unbearable thing. You're holding the door for 100 of them while the one you love waits in the water. I know what that costs. I'll stand here with you while you do it." "You shouldn't do the unbearable parts alone." Harry could not answer her. Every fraction of his will was bent on the border, on the 100 open doors and the shining host and the killing curses still flying in the last of the battle. And the little warmth of Luna's hand in his was the one thread the whole night could not make him spend, the one thing that was not being paid out into the dark, and he held to it while he held the wall, and the two things together were the only reason there was still a Harry standing on the steps at all, and not merely the keeper wearing his face. Doing the office's work with the last of the person burned away. The battle was ending, the battle was ending. With the snake dead, Voldemort's forces had begun to break, the giants fled, the Dementors scattered before the shining host they could not feed on, the faithful who could still run ran. The Dark Lord stood alone in the wreck of the courtyard at the eye of it all, and he was mortal now, stripped of the last of his six. One anchor only left to him in all the world, and that anchor was lodged in the head of the thing that had come to kill him. And Lord Voldemort understood at last the shape of the trap he was in, which was the exact shape of the trap he had set. That the last piece of his immortality lived inside his enemy, and that his enemy could not destroy it without destroying himself, and that here, in this single knot, was the one place the whole cold campaign might still be made to strangle on itself. The courtyard had gone quiet around them. The last of the faithful had fled or fallen, and the defenders of Hogwarts stood ringed at the edges of the broken square, wands lowered, staring, the survivors of a battle they did not understand at the fringe of a duel they could not join. Dumbledore was among them, leaning gray and spent on the elder wand that was not his, an old general who had brought his war to this exact hinge and could do nothing now but watch it turn. The shining host stood ranked and silent behind Harry. Snow had begun to fall, or ash, drifting down through the green light of the fading mark into the wreck of the fountain where a great snake lay dead across a laughing man who had stopped laughing, and in the middle of it alone the two of them, the master and the thing that would not die. "You cannot finish it," Voldemort called across the ruined courtyard, and his high voice cracked with the effort of hope. "The last of me is in you, Potter, in your scar, you have known it since you came back. To end me you must end the piece of me you carry, and to end that you must end yourself. And you will not, because you came back for the living, you told my Bellatrix, you told my servants, you came back to keep your warmth, and there it is dying in the dark this very moment, your gray-eyed man gone to your river, and you are standing on these steps not going to him. So you will not spend the last of yourself to take the last of me. You have not the ruthlessness. You are still, under all that cold, a sentimental child, and a sentimental child cannot do what must be done. And so we are at a stand, you and I, forever, the deathless man and the master who dares not pay the price." Harry did not answer him. He was looking at the near bank, where Sirius turned in the current with his gray eyes lifted, close enough to keep, and he was holding in one cold hand the whole of what he had left of himself, the last few threads, the dwindled warmth, barely enough now to do one great thing or the other, but not, he knew with the office's merciless arithmetic, enough to do both. He could spend it on the man in the river, and pull Sirius Black up out of the dark and back into the world, warm and breathing and alive, and go out like a snuffed wick in the doing of it, and leave the last Horcrux screaming in a hollowed skull with no Harry left to master it. Or he could spend it on the wound in his own head, on the terrible cosmic thing he had not yet let himself look at fully, the unmaking of the fragment that could not be burned without burning its host, and finish the war and close the last door and leave Sirius to go up the river alone. He had at most enough for one. And Death, who did not stop its master, who had promised it would not stop him, stood unseen at the edge of the ruined courtyard among the shining dead, and watched the one it had made stand on the steps of the school that made him, with the whole of his choice come down at last to a single cold hand, and the two things he could not both keep, and it did not speak, and it did not intervene, and it waited with all the patience there has ever been to see what its heir was made of. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Master of Death Voldemort had built a perfect trap, and he had built it, as clever men so often do, out of a single unexamined assumption. The assumption was that death is a door that opens only one way. Every part of his scheme rested on it. He had cut his soul apart so that the door could not take him. He had scattered the pieces so that no one killing could push the whole of him through. And now at the last, cornered in a ruined courtyard with a laughing man dead across his dead snake, he had wagered everything on the belief that the final fragment of him lodged in his enemy's skull was safe there, because to destroy it that enemy would have to walk through the one-way door himself, and no one, Voldemort knew, no one in all the long history of the frightened living walks through that door on purpose to take someone with them. He had forgotten who he was talking to. Harry stood on the steps with Luna's hand in his and Sirius turning in the current on the near bank of a country only he could see, and he let Voldemort finish his speech, the whole triumphant, despairing length of it, the deathless man explaining to the Master of Death why the Master of Death could not win. And when it was done, when the high voice had cracked itself out across the snow and the silence had come down, Harry answered him at last in the flat, quiet voice that did not rise. "You keep making the same mistake," he said. "You made it the night you split your soul the first time, and you made it every time after, and you're making it now. You think death is a wall. It isn't. It's a door, and I keep it, and doors that I keep open both ways for me." He let go of Luna's hand gently and stepped down off the steps into the snow. "You put a piece of yourself in me to keep the last of yourself alive, a lock you thought had no key, because the only key was my own death, and you were sure I'd never turn it. But I've already turned it once, Tom. I've already died. It didn't take. And the thing you never understood, the thing your whole torn, frightened life was built on not understanding, is that dying was never the price of destroying you. Dying is just a place I can go now and come back from, the way you go into a cold room and come back to the fire." He came down into the courtyard as he said it, unhurried, and the snow did not settle on him, and the wreck of the battle went silent around his passage, and Lord Voldemort, who had spent 70 years being the most frightening thing in any room he entered, watched the cold approach and felt, rising in him against his whole will, the exact sensation he had cut his soul apart to never feel again. Every anchor he had made was meant to spare him this moment, the moment of standing in the presence of his own ending with nowhere left to run. He had made 6 of them and a 7th by accident, and one by one they had been closed, and now there was only the last, lodged in the skull of the thing walking toward him across the snow. And even that he understood with a lurch of pure animal terror, even that was about to be taken, because the creature had just told him the one truth he had built his entire existence to disprove, that the door swung both ways for its keeper and that the keeper had come. He went as serious first, because some things will not wait even for the end of a war, and because the test death had set him had come due, and he meant to pass it in the open where the office could see. He crossed to the broken fountain where Sirius lay, and he knelt in the snow, and he opened the gray as he had opened it 100 times that night, and he did not reach into the river to drag his godfather back. He stepped instead to the very edge of the near bank, so that he was crouched with one knee in the world of the living and one in the country of the dead, and he looked at Sirius Black in the current, close enough to touch, close enough to keep. Sirius looked back at him. He was already becoming what the crossed dead become, luminous and unafraid, the gauntness gone out of him, the 12 years of Azkaban and the 4 months of grief washed off him by the river, and he looked, for the first time since Harry had known him, entirely unhaunted, a young man again, James Potter's best friend, laughing at the edge of the water. "Don't you dare," Sirius said before Harry could speak. "I know that look. That's the look you had when you offered your mum a body. I felt you thinking it the second I hit the water. Don't you dare, Harry. I know exactly what it'd cost you, and I'd rather go down this river 100 times than let you pay it." "You died for the snake," Harry said. His voice was not steady. "Here on the bank with no one but the dead to hear, he let it not be one last time. You threw yourself into the gap so I wouldn't have to. You gave me the victory, and I've got just enough left to give it back to you. I could put you back on the grass, breathing, and you could have the life they stole, all of it, 12 years and 40 more, and you'd go out doing it," Sirius said, "like a candle right there in the snow. And I'd stand over you the way I've spent my whole life standing over the graves of people who died so I could live, and it would be the one death in all of them I could never forgive, because it would be the one I bought on purpose." He came as near as the river would let him, and his gray eyes were fierce and clear. "Listen to me. I got 12 years in a cell and 1 month with you back from the dead, and that month, Harry, that cold, strange month at that kitchen table, was worth every one of the 12. You gave me my godson back for a month. Don't you take it and turn it into the thing that kills you. Let me go. It's the last thing I get to do for James's boy, and you will not rob me of it." Harry knelt on the bank a long moment, with the whole of his warmth in his cold fist and the man he loved best in the current in front of him, and the office in him said, as it would always say, that he could, that nothing stopped him, that the door was open and the price was payable and he had only to reach. And Death, unseen at the edge of the courtyard, watched to see whether the thing it had made would reach. He did not reach. "All right," Harry said. "All right, I'll let you go." He put his cold hand out over the water, not to pull, only to touch, and for one impossible instant the river let it happen, let the living cold and the crossing warmth meet, and Sirius Black gripped his godson's hand a last time on the bank of the country of the dead. "But not alone. I keep this border, Sirius. I decide who waits and who walks, and I'm walking you across myself, and I'm putting you exactly where you're meant to be." He turned the gray gently, and far down the current, on the far bright shore, 2 figures were already coming to the water's edge, a man with untidy black hair and a woman with dark red hair who had been waiting 16 years. "They're there. They've been there the whole time. Go on, tell my dad I said the trap he never solved, I solved just in time. He'll know what it means. He'll be insufferable about it." Sirius Black laughed one last time gloriously, the sound Harry had spent on the second Death Eater in a northern hall and could not remember loving until he heard it again. And it came back to him whole in that instant, the whole warm horde of it restored for the length of a heartbeat, a gift from a dying man to the keeper of the door, and then Sirius turned in the current toward the 2 figures on the shore, and let the river take him home. And went up laughing into the light with his best friend's hand already reaching for his, and was gone. Harry knelt on the bank until he was sure. Then he closed the gray and stood and turned back to the courtyard and the deathless thing waiting in it, and there was nothing warm left in his face at all. "Now," Harry said, "you." Lord Voldemort had watched the whole of it and had understood none of it, because he had spent 70 years making himself incapable of understanding the one thing that was happening in front of him. A man with the power to cheat death, choosing, for love not to. To Voldemort it looked like weakness, like the sentiment he had always despised, and he seized on it with the last of his cracking hope. "You see," he called. "You see, you could not even save your gray-eyed man, all that power, and you let him drown. You are weak, Potter. You are exactly as weak as I always knew you to be, hiding behind your dead and your—" "I let him go," Harry said. "There's a difference. You've never once understood the difference, and it's the whole reason you're about to lose. You spent your life unable to let anything go, not power, not fear, not your own soul, and you tore yourself into 7 screaming pieces rather than let go of a single year of a life you didn't even enjoy. And I just knelt in the snow and let go of the last person in the world I love, because keeping him would have cost more than I had the right to spend. That's not weakness, Tom. That's the thing you were never strong enough to do. Watch, I'll show you what it looks like." And Harry reached up and laid his cold fingers against his own scar and turned the key. He did not die to do it. That was the reshaping of fate, the move Voldemort had built his whole immortality on believing impossible. Harry opened the door in himself, as he had opened it in the ring and the locket and the cup and the diadem, except that this door was in his own head, and he stepped, in the way that only he and all the world could step, half across it, 1 foot in the living courtyard and 1 in the country beyond, and he reached into his own skull with the hands of the office and took hold of the fragment of Tom Riddle that had lived there for 16 years. It knew him. It had always known him from the inside, this splinter of soul that had ridden behind his eyes since he was a year old, that had whispered to snakes and burned at the Dark Lord's nearness, and pulled his hand toward a false rescue and a real veil. It clawed at him now, terrified, the most frightened piece of the most frightened creature that had ever lived, and it screamed at him in a voice that was almost his own because it had worn him so long, and it did not want to go, it never wanted to go, wanting not to go was the whole and entire substance of what Tom Riddle had made of his soul. Harry did not hate it. He had never been able to manage hating it, this last and most pitiable of the 7 wounds, and he did not hate it now. He took it as he had taken all the others, gently, and he carried it the little terrible distance across the threshold in himself, out of the living world where it had hidden, and onto his own ground, the bank of the country he kept, where the arithmetic was different, where dominion over the dead cost him nothing at all, and there, on his own ground, with the whole of the office behind him and not one thread of his warmth required, he unmade it. He opened the last door and he sent the 7th fragment down the current where its 6 brothers had gone, and it went, wailing, small and cold, and finally, after 60 years of monstrous effort, ordinary, and the scar on Harry's brow, the scar he had carried his whole life, closed over smooth and cool and quiet, and was only skin. He stepped back whole into the courtyard. He had crossed the one-way door and come back through it, because for him it had never been one way, and the last anchor of Lord Voldemort's immortality was gone down a river Lord Voldemort had spent his life fleeing, and it had cost the Master of Death nothing but the trouble of reaching. Voldemort felt it go. The whole courtyard felt it, the survivors at the edges, Dumbledore leaning on his borrowed wand, the shining host in its ranks. They felt the last wrongness in the world wink out, the final held breath of a torn soul let go at last, and Lord Voldemort, the Deathless One, the terror of 2 wizarding wars, the man who had murdered his way to a scrap of immortality and cut himself into 7 pieces to keep it, stood alone in the snow of a ruined courtyard and was, for the first time since he was 16 years old, an ordinary mortal man. He did not take it well, he threw everything he had. He was still stripped of his anchors, one of the most powerful wizards who had ever lived, and he flung curse after curse across the courtyard at the cold thing that had unmade him. The killing curse and the fire that thinks in the old dark cuts that cannot be healed, and every one of them broke against Harry and did nothing, the way the first green light had broken against him in a northern hall, because none of it had ever been able to touch what Harry was. And Voldemort had simply refused to the very last second to believe it. It was a terrible thing to watch, and the survivors at the edges of the courtyard did watch it, because they could not look away. The most powerful dark wizard of the age throwing the entire arsenal of a lifetime's cruelty at a hooded figure who stood in the snow and did not so much as raise a hand. He conjured fire that took the shape of serpents and dragons and sent it roaring across the square, and it curled around Harry and found nothing to burn and went out. He tore stones from the ruined castle and flung them, and they passed through the Master of Death and shattered on the ground beyond. He reached for the minds of the Watchers, meaning to make hostages of them, meaning to threaten the last thing he had, and found that he could not, because the cold thing in the courtyard had drawn a border around every living soul on those grounds and no reach of his could cross it. He screamed the old words, the killing words, the ones that had never once failed him in 70 years of murder, and the green light broke against Harry Potter and guttered out in the snow again and again, until the words themselves began to fail in his throat. Harry let him spend himself. He stood in the falling snow and let the deathless no longer man empty the whole of his terror and his fury against the unmovable fact of the office, and he did not strike back, because striking back was not the point and had never been the point. When at last Voldemort stood spent and gasping, his wandless hand trembling, his red eyes wide with the beginning of the only emotion he had spent his life outrunning, Harry spoke to him one final time, and his voice was not cruel, and the not cruelty was the most terrible thing in the world. "I'm not going to kill you," Harry said. "I want you to understand that at the end. I'm not going to strike you down or torture you or make an example of you. I gave that up at the Vale. Killing you would be a thing I did for the past, for what you did to me and mine, and I don't spend myself on the past, so I'm not going to do anything to you at all." He stepped aside, and behind him, where he had stood, the air had gone darker than the night and colder than the snow, and something vast and patient had begun at last to resolve out of the dark at the edge of the courtyard. "I'm just going to stop being the only thing in the world that was keeping death waiting. You've felt it out there your whole life, haven't you, circling, patient, the thing you cut yourself apart to escape. It's been waiting 70 years for the day your last anchor fell. Well, it fell, and here's the part you'll have just long enough to understand, Tom. It isn't even angry. You spent your whole life terrified of a thing that was never hunting you. It was only ever waiting the way it waits for everyone to take you home. And death came for Lord Voldemort. It did not hurry. It never hurried. The vast dark weather of it crossed the ruined courtyard, unseen by every living eye but Harry's, and it stood over the trembling mortal man who had defied it longer than any creature in the history of the world, and it regarded him for a moment with the near-infinite courtesy it gave to all its guests. The connoisseur's distaste for the forgery finally set aside now that the forgery was, at last, only a man. And then it did the thing it had waited 70 years to do, and it was not spectacular, and it was not cruel, and that was the awe of it. Lord Voldemort simply died, the way everyone dies, his heart stopping in his chest, his breath going out of him, his red eyes emptying, and he crumpled into the snow of the courtyard, small and shrunken and ordinary, no more and no less dead than the humblest of the millions he had sent down before him. And his soul, what pitiful diminished scrap of it remained after a lifetime of self-butchery, rose up thin and shrieking and was taken by the river like everything else. And death was not gentle with it, because death had promised Harry a lifetime ago at the bottom of the veil that when this one came it would not be gentle, and death kept its word. The dark mark went out of the sky, the snow kept falling, and in the ruined courtyard of Hogwarts the war that had eaten a generation was quite simply over. They did not cheer. That was the thing the survivors would remember, the teachers and the order and the students who had refused the carriages. That when Lord Voldemort fell dead in the snow no one cheered, because the thing that had killed him was still standing in the courtyard with its arms at its sides and the cold coming off it in waves, and they did not know, any of them, whether the ending of the war meant the ending of their danger or only the beginning of a stranger one. They stood at the edges of the broken square and looked at the Master of Death, and the Master of Death looked back at them, and understood with the part of him that was still Harry Potter and always would be, exactly what came next and how much it was going to cost, and paid it. Dumbledore came forward first because someone had to, and because Albus Dumbledore had never in his life been unwilling to walk toward the thing everyone else feared. He stopped a few feet away, leaning on the elder wand, and looked at Harry with the blue eyes, clear and old and unspeakably tired. "It's done," the old man said. "You've done the thing I spent my life failing to do. The war is over, and there is no piece of him left anywhere in the world to bring it back." He was quiet a moment. "What happens now, Harry, is the question I do not know the answer to, and I have spent my life knowing the answers. You are the most powerful being that has walked this earth in 700 years. There is no throne you could not take, no law you could not rewrite, no ending you could not command. The whole of the wizarding world is standing in this courtyard waiting to find out what you mean to do with us." "I know," Harry said. "I've been thinking about it since the veil." He looked past Dumbledore at the frightened faces, the survivors, the whole brave remnant of the world he had died for and come back to keep. "You've all just watched me do impossible things. You've watched me shrug off the killing curse and command the dead and unmake the man who couldn't be unmade. And every one of you standing there doing the same arithmetic Voldemort did, which is, a power like that in the world unanswerable. What stops it becoming exactly the thing it just destroyed? What stops the Master of Death from simply deciding one cold morning that he knows best how the living should live?" He let the question sit in the falling snow. "I'll tell you what stops it, the same thing that stopped it every night for a fortnight in every house I walked into. I don't want it. I never wanted the power. I wanted the people it could save. And the day I forget the difference, I've asked the only one with the standing to do it, to take the whole thing back. He reshaped the world in the end, not by seizing it but by declining to. That was the thing the histories, when they came to be written, could never quite explain, because it had no precedent and made no sense by any rule the living understood. The Master of Death, who could have been a god or a king or a tyrant beyond overthrow, looked at the throne of the whole world lying open at his feet and stepped over it and went back to his border. He set his terms in the courtyard, and they were few, and he kept them for the rest of the age. Harry Potter would remain dead to the world. The martyr on the summer wall would stay a martyr, because a world that had just escaped one deathless overlord did not need to spend the next century afraid of another. And a legend is a cleaner thing to love than a cold man who cannot taste bread. The ministry would rebuild, and Dumbledore would help it, and the ordinary business of the living, the elections and the arguments and the slow, imperfect work of governing themselves, would go on without a cold hand on the scale, because Harry had died to give them exactly that and did not intend to take it back by ruling them. And the Master of Death would withdraw to the work that was actually his. The keeping of the border, the door swinging true, the quiet, unglamorous labor of making sure that what should end did, and what should not end was not ended before its hour, out at the edge of things where the living need never see him and never fear him and never build him a shrine. "And when the door swings wrong," he told Dumbledore at the end, "when something walks that shouldn't, or someone's taken before their time by a thing that cheats, then you'll feel a cold in the room, and you'll know I've come, and you'll leave me to my work, and you'll tell no one. That's the arrangement. It's the same one I made with you over the wand, Professor. You get to hold the world, I get to keep the door. And we both remember who let the other do it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and then the old man did a thing he had not done in the whole of their acquaintance. He bowed fully, the deep bow of a wizard, to a power greater than himself, and there was no calculation left in it at all, only an old man's late, hard-won humility before a thing he had spent his life reaching for and had been right all along never to grasp. "I let you do it gladly," Dumbledore said. "And Harry, thank you, not for the war. For the mercy of not becoming what you could have. I did not think when I built you that the weapon would turn out wiser than the hand." He straightened. "I have perhaps a year left in this hand before the curse finishes what the ring began. I find I am no longer afraid of it. That is your doing too, I think. It is a strange gift to have taught the man who feared death least of all how little there was to fear." "You'll like the crossing," Harry said. "Most people do, and there'll be someone waiting." "There always is." It was as near to forgiveness as he would ever come, and both of them knew it, and for the architect and his weapon at the end of the long ledger it was enough. The survivors of Hogwarts watched him turn to go, and none of them stopped him, and none of them thanked him because they did not have the words for what he was, and he did not want their thanks, and both of these things were plain in the silver air. Only Minerva McGonagall came forward at the last and stood in front of the cold thing that had been her student, and looked up at him with her spectacles fogged and her chin high and the tears standing in her old eyes unwept. "I taught you," she said, "first year, you couldn't turn a match into a needle to save your life, and you were so anxious about it, so desperate to be good enough." Her voice held. "And now look. You've turned death itself, and you're still that anxious boy underneath it, still so desperate to be good enough, aren't you? I can see it. It's the only reason I'm not afraid of you." She reached up, this stern woman who had never in her life touched a student with anything but the flat of authority, and laid her hand for one moment against his cold cheek, the way his mother's shade had, the way Luna did, unflinching. "Go and do your terrible, kind work, Potter. And know that one old woman knew the difference at the end between what you are and what you chose to be with it. Now go on, before I make a fool of myself." Harry inclined his head to her, the only bow he gave anyone that night, and she stepped back into the ranks of the living, and the Master of Death turned to the work that was waiting. Before he withdrew, before he went to the steps and the quiet and the warm hand waiting there, he did the work that was actually his, the work no one had cheered for and no one ever would, and it was, of everything he did that night, the thing that most made him what he was. Before he withdrew, before he went to the steps and the quiet and the warm hand waiting there, he did the work that was actually his, the work no one had cheered for and no one ever would, and it was, of everything he did that night, the thing that most made him what he was. He walked the battles dead across. They lay across the grounds in the falling snow, the ones the war had taken before he could turn every curse, the defenders of the castle, the older students who had refused the carriages and paid for it, an order member here, a teacher there, the ordinary uncounted cost of a victory that the histories would remember only as a triumph. And Harry went to each of them, one by one, in the silver dawn, and knelt and opened the gray and walked them home. He took the terror out of the crossings that had been sudden and afraid. He turned the young ones gently toward the shore and told them wordless in the grammar of the border that they had been brave, that it had mattered, that the thing they died holding had held. He found a seventh year who had been the first through the carriages to turn back and walked her across himself and found her grandmother waiting. He did for the defenders of Hogwarts what he had done for a wandmaker in a ruined shop on the first night of his return, the very first act of his second life, and now in a way the truest. He made their endings kind because that was the office at its purest, the door swinging true, and it was the only monument he would ever build to the ones who fell buying the world its morning. It cost him. Of course it cost him, everything did, and he had so little left. But he had learned across the whole Grey campaign exactly which spending was worth the coin, and there was none worth it more than this. The last threads of his warmth paid out to carry frightened children gently over a river no one else could see, on the morning the war ended, while the living tended the living, and never knew that the cold thing moving among their dead was the kindest presence on that whole terrible field. When it was done, when every soul the night had taken had been walked home and settled on its shore, Harry rose, thinner than he had ever been, with almost nothing left, and went at last to the front steps, where the one warmth he had not spent was waiting for him exactly as she had promised. Luna was waiting for him on the front steps when it was over, because Luna had said she would be the one he came home to, and Luna Lovegood did not say things she did not mean. The snow had stopped. The grounds were silver and still, strewn with the wreck of the battle and the peaceful bodies of the drowned finally allowed to rest, and the shining host had gone back through their 100 doors, and the ghosts of Hogwarts, fewer now by the Grey Lady and one or two others he had walked across in the long night, had drifted back to their corridors to keep their diminished watch. The living were tending their wounded and counting their dead and beginning, already, the long work of not being at war. And the Master of Death sat down on the front steps of the school that had made him, in the silver quiet, thinner than he had ever been, with almost nothing left of the warmth he had carried back through the veil, and Luna sat down beside him and took his cold hand and did not flinch. "You spent nearly all of it," she said. She could see it as she saw everything. "You're very thin now, thinner than your mother would like." "I know," Harry said. "There's a little left, enough for you, enough to know it's you." He looked at their joined hands, hers warm, his cold, the border between them that she had never once let mean anything. "Death told me at the start to bring back enough. I didn't know what enough was. I thought it meant enough power. It meant enough of this. One person who isn't afraid of me to come home to, so I never start believing that being feared is all I'm for." He was quiet a moment. "It's going to keep costing, the work. There'll be nights I come back thinner than this. I'll go gray at the edges and forget more of the warm things, and one day I might forget how to sit on a step in the snow and be glad of a hand. I need you to tell me when that day comes. I need one person in the world who will say, 'Harry, you've gone too thin, come and sit down.' Will you be that for as long as you're willing?" "For as long as I'm willing," Luna agreed, "and probably a good while after, because I'm very stubborn and I've got nothing better to do than keep the loneliest person in the world company." She leaned her head on his cold shoulder and did not shiver, because to Luna the cold was only weather. "You made a promise in the ruin of that house. Your father asked you to. I heard about it on the far side once. Things travel there. You promised you'd let yourself come home in the end. Down the river like everything else when the work's done." "I did. Then that's the arrangement." She looked up at the last stars going out over the mountains. "You keep the door and you keep enough of yourself to be glad of a hand on a step." And I keep you company and tell you when you've gone too thin, and one day, when you've done enough, there's that word again, enough, you set the office down, and you let the river take you home like you let Sirius go, and your mum and dad and your loud gray man are all standing on the shore. And you finally get to be finished like everyone else, because being finished isn't the enemy, it's the whole point. The last note without which the song is only noise that hasn't learned to stop. She smiled out at the dawn. That's a good ending. I've thought about it a great deal. I think it's the best one there is. It is, Harry said, and found to the small surprise of the part of him that was still keeping count of such things, that he meant it. That somewhere under all the cold and the spending and the gray-grayed edges there was still a self left to mean it with, kept alive against every arithmetic by a stubborn girl who would not let go of a cold hand on a snowy step. He looked out at the mountains going gold and the last of the night lifting off the loch, and the living beginning to move again among the wreck of the grounds, tending each other, going on, and he let himself sit in it 1 hour, spending nothing the way Sirius had made him sit at a kitchen table a lifetime ago. The office could wait an hour, the border would hold. And the master of death sat in the sunrise with his one warm thread in his hand, and was, for that hour, simply a young man watching a morning he had died to buy, and it was the richest thing he owned. And far off, at the seat of an office that was no longer empty and would not be empty again for a long, long age, the oldest thing in existence stood at the edge of its enormous country and considered the one it had made. It had made clean instruments before in other ages for other purposes, and they had served without flaw and without mercy and without one moment of the thing the living would call a self, and death had thought at the bottom of a vale beneath London that it might be making another. It had been wrong, and it found, examining the wrongness, that it did not mind. Its heir sat on the steps of a school in the snow with a warm hand in his cold one and almost nothing left of him and the whole of him intact, having been offered the throne of the world and every ending in it, and having taken nothing for himself but a border to keep and a promise to come home someday, and having let go on the bank of the river the one soul he would have spent the world to keep. Death had made the Hallows long ago and set them in the world as a question, and the question had been this: is there a thing that can hold the whole power of the ending and not be poisoned by it, that can stand where I stand and not become what I am? For 700 years the world had answered with grasping men and frightened kings, with a wandmaker who hid and a schemer who collected trinkets and a dark lord who cut himself to pieces, and every one of them had proven the answer to be no, that mastery over death made monsters as surely as death itself, that the power could not be held by anything warm because holding it burned the warmth away. And then a boy had fallen through a veil to save the man he loved, and had died with his eyes open, and had been offered the office and taken it not for the power but for the people it could save, and had spent it not on the dead he ached for but on the living he had never met, and had walked the whole maze to its end and come out the far side still able to be glad of a hand on a step in the snow. The answer, after 700 years, was yes. It had cost him nearly everything he was, and it had cost the one soul he loved best, and it had made of him a thing that would be feared and lonely and burdened past the ending of the age. But the answer was yes, and Death, who had asked the question, found that it had waited all of time to be proven wrong in exactly this way. He had walked the maze to its end. He had done the thing Ignatus did and the thing Ignatus could not. He had greeted death as an equal, and then he had stayed and kept the door and remained through all of it recognizably and stubbornly himself. Look at me, Death had told him, at the bottom of everything, and do not blink. He had not blinked. He had looked and looked 4 times and then a fifth and now past counting into the face of the last enemy, and he had not looked away, and he had not been swallowed, and he had not been made cold all the way through. He had become, instead, the thing the Hallows had been a question about for 700 years, the answer the world had kept getting wrong until a boy fell through a veil saving his godfather and refused, even dead, even remade, even crowned in the cold of the grave, to stop caring about the living. Master of Death, Death had named him, and it had been at the start only a title, the oldest and coldest of all the offices. It meant something warmer now. It meant a keeper who was kind to the frightened at the crossing, and gentle with the dead in their own house, and fierce, past death and past cost and past the ending of everything, for the living he had come back to guard. It meant a cold hand that a stubborn girl was not afraid to hold on the steps of a school in the snow, at the dawn of a world he had reshaped by declining to rule it. And the oldest thing in existence, which had kept its country alone since before there was a word for alone, stood at the edge of everything and watched its heir sit in the sunrise with the last of his warmth held safe in another's hand, and did not flee and was not any longer entirely alone, and found to its own vast and ancient surprise that this, after all the long ages, was enough. Chapter 7 End.